Story 1.
I caught my wife cheating with her boss, partnered with his wife, and made an epic police exposé. I'm 43 and my wife, aged 40, and I have been married for 16 years. We have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. Our marriage had a challenging start, but we got through those tough years and emerged stronger. We married young, lacking some maturity, but our love helped us conquer any challenges. I'm not entirely sure if this was wishful thinking. My wife has been a manager at a large advertising company for 3 years, and I've been an engineer for 7 years. Both our jobs pay well, providing a comfortable lifestyle for our family. We are a close-knit family, always making time for our kids to create cherished memories. Despite being a good dad and husband, I was shocked to discover my wife's long-term affair. Despite some mistakes I made, now on to the discovery, my wife became distant, especially in the last 2 challenging years. She constantly compared me to her boss, who seemed to handle things better. I couldn't read her mind. Unlike her boss, I didn't take the initiative to plan dates and make her feel special, something her boss did for his wife. I asked her what she wanted to spice up our love life, but her response was vague. I needed to already know and do it. Feeling clueless, I researched and bought books, but my attempts were met with disappointment. Unbeknownst to me, it wasn't me who was fixing things all along. We were close to her boss and his family, spending time together at barbecues, family outings, and other activities. I confided in her boss about our marital problems, thinking he was a good person. Back to the discovery, I grew emotionally tired from my wife's demands to improve our marriage. One night she laughed and giggled while texting someone, and when I tried to peek, she angrily pulled away. Suspecting an affair, I made the mistake of asking her directly the next day, but she vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Unable to access her phone initially, I later obtained it and discovered deleted texts. Although some conversations seemed inconsistent, I gathered bits and pieces of proof confirming the affair with her boss. Instead of confronting her immediately, I waited, feeling devastated and concerned about the kids. Despite the pain, I didn't want to give up on the marriage. So, 3 days later, I purchased How to Help Your Spouse Heal from an Affair with the hope of saving our relationship. Planning to talk on a Saturday, she claimed an emergency at work, which seemed suspicious. Unable to confirm, she returned home late on Sunday, avoiding questions about her delay. I suffered, but she seemed indifferent. Desperate for stability, I contacted her boss's wife, who was as shocked as me. We decided to gather evidence on each side and compare. I snooped on my wife, and she did the same with her husband, easily finding undeniable proof. Her husband's arrogance left the text on his phone intact, making sense of the little text I found earlier. We discovered the affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and both of us were furious. Although revenge was tempting, we decided against it. They had slept together in various places, even exchanging pictures. Ignoring the images to avoid scarring ourselves, we sought revenge without engaging in our own affairs. We both drew up divorce papers around the same time, determined to move on from the betrayal. Our spouses were unaware that we knew, so we played our roles. When everything was set, they resumed their affair. This time we collaborated with the boss's wife, knowing exactly where and how to confront them, even the hotel they booked for their weekend getaway. I personally went there with the sheriff, waiting in the lobby while my wife was called down from a room, dressed in a bathrobe. Despite the distance from our home, it wasn't too far. The sheriff asked for her confirmation and she was served. After confusedly affirming her name, it was satisfying to see the shock on her face, but I walked away without rubbing it in. She grabbed my arm, demanding to know the meaning. I told her about the affair and that I'm leaving. Simple. She screamed, pulled my arm, and the sheriff had to intervene, telling her to release me. She started crying, but I left quickly to get home. My wife informed her boss, and he panicked, being served at home. We didn't give them time to recover. We blindsided them just like they did to us. My divorce will be finalized in a couple of months, while hers might take a bit longer. Both my wife and her boss are fighting the divorces, neither wanting to end their marriages. The excuses I hear are that they never intended to leave their spouses. It was a purely clean affair, nothing more. People have worse affairs and still come out with a great marriage. They messed up and would like a chance to fix the situation. I asked my wife about the outcome, and she said she was going with the flow, acting completely out of character. I called her an idiot. People around me criticize me for not giving my wife another chance. My kids know what's going on age appropriate, and they support me but wish we could stay together. My resolve is slipping, especially since we still live in the same house, and my wife is going to therapy and reading the book I brought. She says she's remorseful and will do whatever it takes. All I tell her is that she's sorry she got caught, and that's all I need to know. She called me a bitter, resentful person who can't look past all the negativity. She apologized later, but I know that's how she feels. The boss's wife and I still talk, which my wife hates. She thinks I might have a revenge affair, or that her boss's wife is the reason I won't give us another chance. She has asked me repeatedly to initiate no contact with her boss's wife, just like she did with her boss. I told her she's crazy. We didn't do anything wrong, and why should I respect her opinions now? See, I think I'm done. I have no respect for her. She still doesn't want to give up and is actively trying to engage with me about her thoughts and processes about her affair. I see them as excuses, so I don't entertain her. She wants me to do therapy with her. I've read many places where the therapist blames the sufferer, so I said hell no. She wants me to read infidelity books with her. What's the point if we're going to divorce anyway? She wants to be with me. I told her she's not going to manipulate me with closeness. She says it's not manipulation, just showing how much she loves me. I corrected and said, love me now? People around me, even my mom, are frustrated, saying people make mistakes and my wife realizes through her mistakes that she truly does love me. I tell them I won't be anyone's fallback plan. I feel bad for treating her the way I do, but I still love her even though there's hate. Am I being unnecessarily cruel to her? She's trying hard, but I just don't care. Should I reconsider the divorce? People are saying I'm moving too quickly and might regret it. Is that true? I don't know what's real. Update. Thanks for your concern, guys. My wife and I are in a sort of good place, but we're not reconciling. I'm still divorcing her because her affair was too long for me to get over. If it had been a one-night stand, that would be a different story, but no, 2 years is just a slap in the face. I've gone to a few therapy sessions with her because I'm not a monster and still love her. One session was very good and made me understand her remorse. She hasn't handled the fallout perfectly, but she's been trying pretty damn hard. The second session was a mess, her being upset with me for continuously contacting the boss's wife and her being afraid of a revenge affair. It was the angriest I ever was through this whole mess, and we argued a great deal later because I refused to do what she wanted, which is no contact with the boss's wife. That was resolved when I promised her that there would be no revenge affair. I know I don't owe her anything, but she is still my wife until our divorce, and I still want to hold true to my commitments. I've attended more sessions with her to check on her progress. Yes, this therapist handles both individual and marriage counseling. No, I'm not attending these sessions because I secretly want to save our marriage. I just want to witness my wife's progress and be involved if needed. After the divorce, I'll step away gracefully. The boss's wife is still leaving her husband, and he's still resisting the divorce. She's as determined as I am, and I'll admit we confide in each other during low days. I still don't see any affair. We're just on friendly terms. She's a strong, independent woman who doesn't tolerate nonsense. My kids are doing well. They understand that divorcing doesn't mean we love them any less. They don't want a divorce, but they understand why it's necessary for us in an age-appropriate way. My wife no longer works at the advertising company. She resigned after I served her. She's strictly no contact with her former boss, according to her. She sought help on forums to save the marriage. I've been reading a lot here, and initially, I didn't get why people stayed with adulterers. But after seeing my wife work hard to be a better person, I can see the temptation. She's not a monster. She's just flawed and made horrible choices, learning to be better. She's offered everything for another chance, but I'm not sure. As the divorce nears, I feel more at peace. We recently discussed her asking for a chance after the divorce. She's offered a postnup. I wasn't completely opposed, but it would be a very, very long road for her, to be honest. A huge part of me wants this divorce for a fleeting sense of justice, the only justice I can get without becoming an adulterer. My mom and I reconciled after I revealed more about my wife's affair, but now she's furious after learning the details. Navigating her anger is challenging. Regarding a revenge affair, I didn't want to write here until my divorce was finalized, but I'm just angry today and need to vent. As many of you know, my wife is scared crazy about a revenge affair. The simple reason is because I'm still in contact and see the other betrayed spouse. My wife is very insecure compared to the other betrayed spouse. Is that how it's spelled? The other betrayed spouse is younger, a model, very attractive, and owns a successful business. It makes my wife paranoid that I will give in to temptation and cheat on her as revenge. I still can't believe the nerve of her to give me the two wrongs don't make a right speech. Of course, she isn't wrong, and I don't intend to ever follow through, but her hypocrisy infuriates me. Every time I visit the other betrayed spouse, my wife gets extremely sad or clingy. I don't know how many times she has thrown herself at me just to make sure I don't cheat on her back. I reject her attempts, and it only makes things worse. It absolutely floors me that cheaters are this selfish, only thinking about themselves and their pain while the betrayed have to trudge along and try to pick up the pieces. Another thing, our kids still see their kids. I never go to the other betrayed spouse without my kids. But no, my wife still thinks I have it in me to be as heartless as she was and take any opportunity to be with another woman. Laughable. Olm is still living in their holiday home, begging the other betrayed spouse to take him back. I won't lie, it brings me a sense of great satisfaction to see him suffer the consequences. He hasn't tried to threaten me because of how much leverage I have on him. He is allowed to visit his kids anytime he wants but doesn't want to see me, so he makes sure I'm not around and then visits. I pity the guy, honestly. Currently, my wife has been extremely apologetic. She's been showing me a lot of affection, but I've been ignoring it because I'm not in a good place. We have a therapy session today, and I plan to express all the pain and hurt I've endured because of her. The rage I feel is becoming overwhelming. Update: during a recent therapy session with my wife, she asked for more time to win me back. She had several reasons why I should at least try to participate in recovering our marriage, not necessarily reconciling. I kept pointing out that she's only trying now because of the fallout from her affair. If she was still with the other person, she wouldn't be making an effort. She emotionally mistreated me for months, and I won't let myself be walked all over, even by the woman I loved. She acknowledged her wrongdoings and apologized again, making many promises to make it up to me. She wants our marriage to become stronger than ever and believes it's possible. I asked if she was willing to deal with my rage because I have a lot of it. She said absolutely, encouraging me to unload on her whenever I needed to process the pain. Usually, when I ask her why she had an affair, I get a million excuses. This time, she was straightforward, admitting there was no excuse for what she did. She vowed to show through her actions every day for the rest of her life that she's truly remorseful and would never hurt me that way again. She opened up about her feelings, revealing she was very insecure and jealous of the other betrayed spouse. The affair boosted her ego, making her feel beautiful and desired. She admitted it was a fantasy that would never last, regretting it deeply. She acknowledged the guilt she'd carry for the rest of her life and said she'd probably never forgive herself. She confessed she could never compare to the other betrayed spouse, and her certainty that I would cheat back stemmed from the other person's beauty and integrity. The other betrayed spouse never said a mean thing or threatened her. It was all my wife's insecurities talking. The therapist asked what it would take for me to consider my wife's proposal. I couldn't think of anything and honestly said I needed a time machine because what I have now is a sham of a marriage. I never signed up for this. The therapist suggested that all marriages face problems, and how they're dealt with shows the strength of a marriage. I was taken aback and told the therapist to focus on my wife, not us. The therapist suggested my unwillingness to listen to logical reasoning might be a communication problem. I didn't disagree. On the drive home, my wife and I had a long talk. She asked if I felt emasculated due to her affair, surprising me with the question. I answered yes. She then shocked me by asking if I would feel better if I slept with another woman. I reiterated that I'm not normal and wouldn't have a revenge affair. She clarified she meant a trial separation where I could go out and regain my confidence. She'd remain faithful and wait for me to come back when I'm ready. I thought her proposal was crazy, asking how it would benefit the marriage for both of us to have affairs. She argued that mine wouldn't be an affair because we'd be separated with conditions allowing me to see other people. I rejected the idea, finding it out of character for her to propose that. Despite not trusting her, she has been surprisingly calm and patient these few weeks, almost like a different person from the insecure one. Even though she doesn't want it, she has been generous in the divorce, making the situation difficult to navigate. Before I dive into it, I want to thank those who've been supporting me. Right now, my wife and I decided to be civil and spend the holidays together for our kids. This will be our last holiday, though my wife hopes otherwise. I'm doing it for our kids because I love them. Our divorce will be final in mid-February. For those curious, we've split everything 50-50ths, though my wife has been generous. I'm unsure if it's a tactic for later nastiness. So far, she's been nice, confessing it's because I've been a great husband and father, so I should get a fair divorce. She won't lose much in the divorce, but I'll get slightly more thanks to her. I stopped therapy with her. It gave false hope. She admits a desire for closeness due to my absence, understanding I felt emasculated due to her affair. She's been frequently trying to engage me in closeness, which is new since my wife hardly initiated closeness before. Over time, I appreciated her addressing my hang-up, but I reject her attempts. She insists it's not about reconciliation. She just wants me to feel good and desired. I've cut off contact with the other betrayed spouse temporarily due to things getting too personal. The other betrayed spouse confessed interest, willing to wait until my divorce is finalized before anything. I'm confused and unsure about returning her feelings, so we decided to take a break until everything is sorted out. Despite someone suggesting my presence affects her reconciliation, I have nothing to do with her decision to leave Om. She's done with him, and we don't talk badly about our spouses when together. Om recently apologized in person, but I didn't accept it. Call me petty, but I don't care about what he's going through. I have a question. Is it okay to have closeness with my wife even if we're not reconciling? I miss the closeness, and my wife is eager, trying everything possible to initiate it. Sometimes I find it hard to resist. She even got rid of anything related to Om without me asking, as I didn't care to know where they had closeness. It's not easy for me to switch off these feelings. Is this a trap? Am I being played? Before someone suggests kicking her out, I've tried that, but I want her here for less hassle until the divorce is done. Rant, it's finally dawned on me. I thought I wasted years on a seemingly worthless woman, but she gave me great kids and memories. I won't forget that. But I now understand I can do better than her. I've received advice and finally understand I deserve better. She treated me poorly when another man showed her attention, investing her energy in him. Only now, when I'm over her, does she try everything to keep me and invest in us. Now she wants me to be happy, even being adventurous in bed. While our previous closeness wasn't perfect, I liked it. I realize I've missed out on a lot. Through her texts with knowing just the tip of the iceberg and how graphic their encounters were, now she values my boundaries, sees me as the king she should have before. But it feels fleeting. She's transparent and brutally honest, expressing regret for the affair. I see her constant look of shame and hopelessness when I'm unreceptive, making me hate myself sometimes. But it's necessary. Why can't I see this as a positive thing? Why can't I judge her for her remorseful actions? Many people have long-term affairs and come out stronger, right? Why am I basing decisions on emotion and not mature objectivity? Someone else might get the improved version of her while I navigate another uncertain relationship. Why not fight for this when everything seems to point to something good in the future? I've been given these lines and have one answer. I won't accept disrespect. Maybe I was willing to in the early stages, but I woke up from that quickly. Update: I'm going to enjoy this Christmas with my entire family and then move on from my wife. I decided to stop listening to the nonsense I created in my head to keep my wife's control over me and move on entirely from the idea of her. I won't be dating her or giving us another chance. We are over for good. I like to say my wife isn't a villain, and that's true. I want her to be happy, but it will never be with me. She has shown me that. I called the other betrayed spouse today and offered her dinner after the holidays for her support when I hit rock bottom. She said she would love to. I know this doesn't happen often, but we really supported each other throughout all of this, and I owe her thanks. Before people start talking about how much I planned this with the other betrayed spouse, I honestly did not. My emotions have been so screwed up these few years that the very thought of another woman never crossed my mind. And it's dinner, nothing else unless we both want it. But the closer divorce gets, the more I realize I actually have options. And one option has been right there. What about I don't give a flying fuck about the dude. I do not think I will marry again, and I will tell this to any woman. Although my divorce hasn't been much of a hassle, I am losing a lot of money still. The whole idea of marriage just seems like a sham to me now. Sorry for being so cynical. Right now, I don't want this post to offend anyone, but I'm still jaded. I gave my best years to this woman, and I'm starting to realize how little I got back. Update: officially divorced. It's been a long time coming. It's over. My ex and I have officially separated for good. It happened almost 3 weeks ago, and for a few days. After, I grieved like I lost a loved one. It hit me extremely hard that my marriage failed so spectacularly. I never cried that hard, ever since I discovered the affair in the first place. I raged a lot too, definitely one of my lowest points. Everything has been organized for my ex, partially for the kids' sake. She moved out of the house, and I'm looking to buy her out of her part of it. She lives in an apartment now, a big downgrade for her, which depresses her. She is still going to therapy, still invested in reading and studying infidelity. I don't know exactly why. We've had long talks leading to and after the divorce, minimal physical contact. I know I shouldn't entertain her now, but she's still the mother of my kids, and I want us to be good co-parents. I'm nothing if not logical about the situation, largely thanks to this community and others. It's the same tune. She wants to reconcile, and I think it's too risky for me to put myself in that situation again. Unfortunately, I'm not in the mood to give her that gift. This past weekend, I accompanied the other betrayed spouse, Obs, to dinner with no intention other than enjoying each other's company and chatting. We talked about all sorts of things. Things got flirty between us, and I must admit I was very reluctant to entertain the rapidly changing mood. Well, I guess I should say the night ended in a very passionate way. Sorry for the TMI. It was probably the most perfect closeness I've ever had. OBS is very much a giver and spades above my ex. I did not intend for it to go that far, but OBS and I were willing, and I was as well. I learned quite a few more tricks in the sack. It's the first time I ever had someone that enthusiastic to please me and not the other way around. Guess I shouldn't call her the other betrayed spouse anymore, as she divorced her ex, but for privacy's sake, I'll just use that. I do not think we will take our relationship further, to be honest. I think the hormones and wine got the best of us that night. She would like to, but I am undecided. I need to sort myself out emotionally, and I think she does as well. I feel very good though. People might not like hearing this, but the closeness I had with OBS really helped a lot with my residual self-esteem issues. I felt desired, alive, and finally understood what I was missing out on. I will never settle for robotic closeness again. What was more satisfying was knowing that I was not cheating and did not lower my morals. All things considered, I'm very proud of how I handled all this crap. I wasn't perfect, but I did the best I could. I'm probably coming out very lucky compared to many betrayed spouses, even if I did lose a substantial amount of money in this process. But it was because I was willing to absorb advice and listen to people with experience, instead of going in blind and hoping for the best. Takeaways: respect yourself. Never tolerate disrespect, even from those closest to you. Everyone deserves a healthy and fulfilling relationship. Don't settle for less from your partner. A committed relationship should have a satisfying closeness life. If your partner isn't putting in the effort, especially if they did so before or during an affair, don't accept it. Express your dissatisfaction. If your partner doesn't meet your needs, don't settle for unexciting closeness unless you both agree. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It's incredibly important. If you're betrayed, only you can truly heal yourself. It took me a long time to grasp this. There are more points, but that's all I can think of now. I'll answer comments for a few hours, but after that, I'm done posting here and moving on with my life. Have a good one, everyone. Update: I intentionally avoided anything related to infidelity because I still get triggered now and then. I'm dealing with the trauma and trying to move on without dwelling too much on it. I'm okay, no accidents or disappearing acts. I'm still in a relationship with OBS, now my girlfriend. She resolved her case with regarding child custody and finances maturely instead of seeking revenge. There's some tension among the children, and we've started therapy to help them adjust and understand that our relationship doesn't diminish their importance. It's challenging because not everyone is on board. My daughter, OBS, and OM's kids don't like being around each other, and there's tension. My ex-wife strongly dislikes OBS, probably upset that she's influencing my perspective. I'm genuinely concerned about her behavior. She tried something at a 4th of July party, and though I stopped it, she's persisting. People warned me she might pine for me, and they were right. OBS is letting me handle it, but is also growing weary of my ex. I thought my ex was changing for the better, but since I left her, she's been a train wreck. It's puzzling. I treated her well and she treated me poorly. But the moment I said forget you, she's desperate for my attention. Update recent. I want to share a realistic update, not a fairy tale. Let's address the big question: how are OBS and I doing? Honestly, we're doing fantastic. If I had known a woman like her existed earlier, I would have found her years ago. Jokes aside, our relationship is the strongest I've ever had. Because my ex-wife put me through so much, I didn't really know what a healthy relationship looked like. I still doubted myself, but OBS has been an amazing partner, helping me through this. I'm genuinely in love with her. She consistently shows me how much I mean to her, and I feel the same way. However, we're keeping it at the girlfriend level. I'm still unsure about the whole idea of marriage. We're keeping our relationship private and involving the children as little as possible, although they know we're dating now. About the kids, it was a bit rough at first, who am I kidding? But they're getting along really well now. Our heavy involvement in their lives and ensuring they had someone to talk to when they had problems helped. Also, there's been a lot of therapy. My daughter and son adore OBS. She has a great connection with kids, and her children like me much more than they did almost 2 years ago. Her youngest even started telling people that I'm her stepdad at functions and outings I took her to, which was a surprise. I was concerned she might feel pressured to see me that way. But she assured me she liked me a lot and that I make her mom happy, so she's happy I'm her stepdad. Hearing that hit me emotionally, though I put up a strong front. I enjoy seeing my kids happily playing with the others. Even though they formed a united front to playfully tease my son, the only boy and the youngest of the bunch. I'm not sure if I should laugh or cringe at that one. About my cheating ex-wife, we are on good terms. She's been working hard to repair her relationship with our daughter, and I was pleased when my daughter said she could find it in her heart to forgive her mother for what she did. They've been through a lot and have made progress together. Despite that, I don't think my ex-wife has fully accepted that we're done as a couple. She seems to be looking for or hinting at a second try. She's been hitting the gym and attending individual therapy. Overall, she seems much healthier now, but I don't really care. I've made peace with the past, and it's her problem for not doing the same. She talks more with OBS, and that's reciprocated. However, OBS regards her with skepticism, which is understandable given everything that's happened. About he's a lost cause. I didn't realize what a mess the guy would be. Despite all his money, he has a girlfriend now, but his kids despise her and are very open about it. It took me some time to see how full of himself the dude was. To be honest, I don't like his girlfriend either. She comes off as extremely materialistic, selfish, and callous toward the girls. In conclusion, we're doing better than okay. Don't get me wrong, I had doubts about whether this was the right path. But with a lot of effort from everyone involved, it's turning out splendidly. No happily ever after, just genuinely happy now.
Story 2.
I suggested an open marriage with another couple, but my husband raged when he caught us cheating. I'm a 24-year-old guy, you can call me Jeff, and my fiancée is a 22-year-old woman, let's call her Julie. I first met Julie at a fast casual restaurant where she works as a cashier and serves beverages. Right from the start, I found her extremely attractive and would always find reasons to strike up a conversation with her. If she happened to be busy with another customer, I'd let them go ahead of me just so I could place my order with her. Gradually, I began frequenting the restaurant for lunch about 2 to 3 times a week just to chat with her, but I never quite found the courage to ask her out. Then one day, while she was ringing up my order, she wrote her phone number on the back of my receipt and encouraged me to call her that evening, expressing how much she enjoyed our conversations. I did just that, and we talked for a solid 2 hours. Toward the end of our conversation, I mustered up the courage to ask her out on an official dinner date. The date went really well, and she opened up to me about her life, revealing that she is the mother of a 4-year-old boy. She became a mother during the beginning of her senior year in high school. As she told me, the child's father was never a part of the child's life. He moved to Georgia after graduation, and she hasn't had any contact with him since. She also mentioned casually dating a few other guys in the past, but nothing had turned serious. On my end, I had 2 previous girlfriends before Julie. When I learned about her child, I expressed that I'd like to maintain our friendship, but wasn't interested in pursuing anything more, given her existing responsibilities as a mother. She was understanding and agreed with this arrangement. We continued to hang out, meeting up once or twice a week, just enjoying each other's company. This dynamic continued for nearly 2 months until one day she surprised me with a kiss. From that point, our next 3 dates gradually became more passionate, and eventually, we took our relationship to the next level. It was an amazing experience, and from then on, I was fully committed. We started spending every evening and weekend together, and after a couple of weeks, she introduced me to her son, whom we'll call Josh. Josh and I immediately connected, and he started joining us almost every time we were together. Even though I initially had reservations, I ended up falling in love with Julie and her son. When I discussed the situation with my parents, they had their doubts. They believed that, given my recent graduation and stable job, I could find someone else. My mother questioned whether I truly wanted to take on the responsibility of raising another man's child. I clarified that we weren't at that stage yet, but would consider it in the right circumstances. A few weeks later, I introduced Julie and Josh to my parents, and their opinions began to shift. They found Julie to be very nice and quickly developed a fondness for Josh. Afterward, they expressed their approval of our relationship but advised caution since I had only known Julie for a few months at that point. I assured them that I would proceed at a comfortable pace. During that period, Julie had a roommate named Jane. Jane also worked at the restaurant with Julie and was engaged to be married. After Julie and I had been dating for 8 months, she informed me that Jane wanted to move in with her fiancé. But Julie couldn't afford the rent without Jane. After some consideration, I decided to move in with Julie and Josh, allowing Jane to make her move. I had lived with my parents throughout my entire life, even during my college years, and I felt it was time for me to become more independent. Julie and Jane supported my decision, but my parents strongly objected. They emphasized that it was ultimately my choice but expressed their concerns. I reassured them that it wasn't a long-term commitment, and I wouldn't be signing a lease. I was simply taking over Jane's share of the rent payment. When I moved in, there were still 7 months left on the lease. Fast forward, Julie, Josh, and I have been living together for almost 5 months now, and everything has been going smoothly. I had developed strong feelings for Julie, and I'd grown very close to little Josh. We were so close that he once told me he wished I were his dad. Even though I suspected Julie encouraged him to say that, I knew he genuinely liked me. As I mentioned, everything was going well until an unusual incident occurred about 3 weeks ago. One night after Josh had fallen asleep, Julie and I were talking. She mentioned that one of her key coworkers, Jamie, found me attractive and expressed interest in being intimate with me. Shockingly, she also revealed that Jamie's husband wanted to have an affair with her. I was completely taken aback and disgusted by this revelation. I informed Julie that I appreciated the compliment but had absolutely no interest in being intimate with Jamie. I also inquired about Jamie's husband, and this was the first time Julie had mentioned anything about this situation to me, which left me quite upset. Rather than addressing my question directly, Julie proceeded to ask if I was aware that Jamie and her husband were bi, and involved in an open relationship. I responded, no, how would I have known that unless you told me? Julie then wanted to know if I thought any less of them, to which I replied that I didn't judge them. I mentioned that as adults they were free to make their own choices, but that such a lifestyle wasn't something I personally embraced, and I hoped it wasn't something Julie was considering either. We concluded the conversation there, but Julie's demeanor left me pondering this matter intermittently over the past few weeks. Now let's fast forward to yesterday, or more precisely, last night, when everything took a dramatic turn. Julie's former roommate Jane and her long-term boyfriend got married. They had a civil ceremony at 5:30 p.m., followed by a lively reception. The party extended into the early hours of the morning. I typically don't consume alcohol, and I was the designated driver for Julie and several of her friends due to my large SUV. The group consisted of Jamie, her husband, and another coworker of Julie's, Jess, who attended the wedding solo. These three friends had plans to indulge in drinking and get intoxicated. Julie mentioned she would limit herself to only 1 or 2 drinks, claiming she didn't get drunk anymore. In fact, I had never witnessed her drink prior to last night. As the night went on, everyone was enjoying themselves, imbibing and dancing. Around 11:30, I noticed that Julie appeared slightly tipsy, which struck me as odd since I had only seen her nurse 2 drinks all night. I asked her if she had consumed more alcohol, and she replied in the negative. By this time, it was nearly 1 a.m., and the last of the partygoers were leaving. I gathered everyone who had ridden with me into my vehicle. Our first stop was Jess, the single attendee, whom I dropped off. The next stop was at Jamie and her husband's apartment. When I pulled over, Julie mentioned that she needed to use the restroom. She exited the car and followed Jamie and her husband, whom I'll call Joe, up the stairs to their apartment. I remained in my vehicle with the engine running, assuming she would return within a few minutes. After waiting for about 10 to 12 minutes, I turned off the engine and decided to check on the situation. Upon reaching the door, I knocked and entered. Inside the living room stood Julie, along with Jamie and Joe, all visibly intoxicated from their conversation. Without any prompting from me, Julie suggested, "Let's sleep here tonight." I nervously chuckled and replied, "No, let's go." But what she said next left me stunned. Julie continued, saying, "They've got 2 bedrooms, you and Jamie can sleep together, and me and Joe can sleep together." Hearing this, disbelief and anger welled up within me. I reiterated, "Let's go." However, Julie retorted, "I'm not going anywhere, and you can't make me. You can stay here with us, or you can leave." Frustrated, I approached her, gently reaching for her hand. She pulled her hand away abruptly and snapped, "Get off me." In response, I said, "Okay," turned and exited the door. I was burning with anger at this point, thoughts racing through my mind at lightning speed. I drove back to our apartment, briefly contemplating returning to see what was happening. Then I realized I no longer cared about her actions. At this point, I was done. I made the decision to pack all my personal belongings into my SUV and move out. So, from around 1:45 a.m. to just before 3 a.m., I went in and out of the apartment, loading up my vehicle. Subsequently, I drove to my parents' house and called them on the way to let them know I was coming over. They were not critical or judgmental, but my dad offered his perspective, saying, "Son, it's best you found this out now." The following morning, around 9:30 a.m., Julie called me, but I allowed it to go to voicemail. She left me a message as if nothing had occurred, saying, "Hi babe, it's me. I hope you slept well. I fell asleep as soon as you left. Come get me as soon as you can. I love you." She called again 15 minutes later, and once again, I chose not to answer. She continued calling repeatedly, her voicemails becoming increasingly frantic, and she also started texting me. In one of the texts, she admitted, "Jamie just told me what an a-hole I was to you last night. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. Please come get me." I did not respond to any of these messages. Approximately an hour later, she left me another voicemail, realizing that I had moved out of the apartment. In this message, her desperation was evident as she asked why I had left and claimed that she was drunk, emphasizing that she didn't mean anything she had said. She also reassured me that nothing had happened between her, Joe, or Jamie. She concluded by saying, "I know you're at your parents' place and I'm coming over." Upon hearing this, I didn't want her to create a scene at my parents' house, so I quickly sent her a text. She immediately responded with a text pleading for me to come back home. I replied simply, "No, we are done." She texted back, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding. Again, I responded firmly, "We are done." She then texted back, saying she was coming over to my parents' house. I messaged her, letting her know that I was leaving for the day and wouldn't be there when she arrived. I informed my parents about her impending visit and expressed my desire to avoid seeing her and any potential scene she might create. At this point, I had no idea how she would react, as she had been a completely different person last night from the woman I had known. I left the house and headed to a coffee shop, planning to stay there until she left. I asked my parents to call me if she showed up. About half an hour later, my dad called and informed me that Julie had been there and had left. He had greeted her at the door and informed her that I wasn't at home and that he didn't know when I would return. This all transpired just a few hours ago, and I'm still here at the coffee shop typing out this lengthy post, which has been quite cathartic, by the way. Now, I'm experiencing some doubts regarding my choice. Do you believe I reacted too strongly, or was my decision justified? Julie has been a fantastic partner until last night. Will this be something I'll reflect on in 10 years with regret or celebration? Final update. Hello everyone, I've received several requests for an update, so I wanted to fill you in on the current situation. Julie and I are officially no longer together. The whole ordeal with her turned out to be a massive deception. It's incredible how naive I was. I want to clarify that I haven't spoken to Julie in person or on the phone since the day everything came to light. We've only communicated through text messages. Right after my last post, Julie kept texting me, insisting that nothing happened between her, Joe, or Jamie. She even had both Joe and Jamie call me and leave messages, claiming they were all just friends and nothing else had ever occurred between them. They swore on their lives and more to this fact. Well, I've since learned that this was far from the truth. Recently, I joined an axe-throwing class offered at a local pub. In my class was the single girl who had ridden with us to the wedding, Jess. After our first class, I asked Jess if she had time to grab a drink and catch up, and she agreed. We were chatting, and she inquired about the reason behind my breakup with Julie, so I told her. The first thing Jess revealed was that Julie, Jamie, and Joe were downing shots at the wedding every time I took a break to go to the bathroom or get some fresh air. What she disclosed next shook me to my core. Jess mentioned that Julie, Jamie, and Joe have been engaging in threesomes regularly for the past 2 years. She assumed I knew about it since Julie had told everyone we were polyamorous. According to Jess, this unconventional relationship was common knowledge among the restaurant staff, and I could confirm it with Jane or anyone else. From there, my initial thought was, when did they find the time to do this? Julie and I were rarely apart except when we were at work. What a fool I've been, but I've certainly learned my lesson. I've become a much wiser and stronger person through all of this. Regarding Julie being bi and polyamorous, if that's her preference, fine, but why did she have to deceive me like that? What a terrible thing to do. From now on, I'm strictly into casual dating. On that note, Jess and I have started a friends with benefits arrangement, and it's been fantastic so far. Julie has no idea. She still reaches out to me every few days, pleading for me to return. I've never responded, and I never will. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I'm a 27-year-old guy. Let's call me Marvin. And I've been married to my wife, who is 25, we'll call her Mary, for a little over 6 months. Our journey began about 4 years ago when we met at a wedding reception, which almost didn't happen for her. Mary attended the wedding as a last-minute guest with a friend who was part of the bridal party. I noticed she was spending some time alone while the bridal party was busy with photos. So I decided to strike up a conversation. We clicked right away, began dating, fell in love, and eventually moved in together a year later. Everyone around us thought we were the perfect couple. In terms of work, Mary holds a staff position at a large company, and I work in a professional role at a company's headquarters. I won't delve into more specifics to safeguard our privacy. Our entire relationship felt like a dream, and I woke up each day looking forward to it. However, just a few days ago, my once perfect marriage shattered into countless pieces. It happened on a Thursday, and I arrived home around the usual time, approximately 5:30 p.m. To my surprise, Mary was already there, wearing a mini skirt and an apron. Normally, she doesn't get home until 6 p.m. She welcomed me at the door with a warm kiss and hug, mentioning that she left work early to prepare my favorite dinner. She had even picked up our favorite wine and a cheesecake we both adore. Mary wanted to pamper me to show her love. I was so excited that I carried her into the bedroom, and things heated up before dinner. After our passionate moment, we sat down to eat. She sat on my lap, and we shared hugs and kisses in between bites and sips. Once we finished the meal, she stood in front of me, pressing her lower chest and stomach against my face. I wasn't sure what she was up to, but I played along. She then asked me to look up at her and drop the news. We're pregnant. I couldn't have been happier. I stood up, lifted her, and twirled her around. We both laughed, and I must admit shed tears of joy, as we had been trying to start a family since our wedding night. We loaded the dishwasher and sat down to enjoy our cheesecake. That's when I suggested we do a three-way call with our parents to share the news together. Mary liked the idea, so we used her phone on speaker mode to tell both sets of parents about the exciting news. They were overjoyed, as this would be the first grandchild for both families. Afterward, we cuddled on the couch and discussed getting ready for the baby. I felt incredible, words can't express it. But then things took a sudden turn. Mary left for the bathroom, and when she returned, she had an envelope in her hand, which she handed to me. She asked me not to be upset with her. I reassured her, telling her, "How could I be mad when you had just made me the happiest man in the world?" As I opened the envelope, I found a 2-page handwritten letter from Mary to me. She began by expressing her love for me more than anything else in the world, followed by a string of all the wonderful things a wife could say about her husband. Then came the bombshell. She revealed that on 2 consecutive days just before Christmas, she had a romantic encounter with a CO worker from her company. She went on to say it was the biggest mistake of her life and that she'd spend a lifetime making it up to me. Naturally, I was in shock by this point and asked, "What's going on?" She simply looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and said how deeply sorry she was. I questioned, "Is this for real?" She confirmed it and broke into tears again, expressing her sincere apologies. I pressed her for the identity of the man, but she refused to answer, insisting it didn't matter since it was in the past and would never happen again. I asked once more, but she still refused, so I stood up and headed for the bedroom to start packing. I didn't just pack clothes, I also gathered some of my personal belongings because cheating was a deal-breaker for me. While I walked toward the apartment door, she was on the floor, clinging to my left leg, crying. I continued walking slowly, gently trying to free myself from her grip. As I reached the door and opened it, she let go and stood up, and there happened to be a guy coming down the hall, whom I greeted as I opened the door. After that, I drove straight to my car and traveled 20 miles away to stay in a hotel for the night. On the way, I phoned my nearby living brother and explained what had unfolded, and he couldn't believe it. He remarked that there might be no recovering from this, to which I replied that I wasn't certain because I felt utterly devastated and didn't want to dwell on it. He suggested that I come to his place, but I declined, saying I wasn't in the right state of mind to drive, so he insisted on coming over to the hotel to talk to me. The first thing my brother inquired about was whether the child was mine. My response was, "Oh man, I didn't even think about that." My self-esteem plummeted, and I started venting my frustrations, with my brother patiently allowing me to let it all out. Once I had calmed down, my brother advised, "You need to devise a plan for how to handle this situation. I'll assist you." I initially expressed my desire to find a way to salvage the marriage, but my brother reasoned with me. He explained that I had a unique opportunity to walk away from this without major consequences, as an annulment of the marriage could be a possibility. He cited an example from our childhood where a neighbor cheated on his wife just 3 months into their marriage, and the wife was granted an annulment. By the end of our conversation, I still felt terrible, but I had a clear plan for my next steps. The following day, which was Friday, I had chosen to take the day off since I had worked 4 10-hour days the previous week, earning me a day off. I spent that day researching attorneys and managed to secure appointments with 3 different law firms. Throughout the day, Mary bombarded me with non-stop calls and texts. She didn't go to work, and her voice sounded frantic. I chose to ignore her calls, but did reach out to both our parents to explain the entire situation. I also called her best friend and canceled the double date we had scheduled with her and her boyfriend for Friday night. Perhaps I shouldn't have disclosed our personal issues to everyone, but I was consumed by anger and a desire for revenge at that point. Later in the afternoon, my sister-in-law called, mentioning that Mary had been trying to contact her all day. She informed me that Mary had driven to their house twice to see if I was there, which was a 30-minute drive, illustrating her frantic state. My sister-in-law told Mary that I wasn't there and that they knew my whereabouts but couldn't divulge the information. The messages from my wife were essentially incoherent, filled with frantic pleas amid sobs, containing all the things you'd expect from someone in her situation. On Friday evening, I treated my brother, sister-in-law, and parents to a lovely dinner at a nice restaurant. It was a kind of celebratory dinner for my brother and sister-in-law since their 10th anniversary was just around the corner. We had an enjoyable time, although our conversation mostly revolved around Mary and me. They all believed it would be best for me to seek an annulment, move forward, and start anew. However, I wasn't entirely convinced. They proposed that I meet with Mary the following day to break the news to her. My sister-in-law also insisted that I request a prenatal paternity test to determine the biological father of her baby. I had no prior knowledge that such tests were possible. I assured them that if the baby turned out to be mine, I would wholeheartedly love and be the best father to the child. If not, that would be Mary's responsibility to address. Throughout the meal, Mary called me 4 times, while my brother, mom, and sister-in-law each received 2 calls from her. Before leaving the restaurant, I phoned Mary and arranged to meet her the next morning at my brother's house. She had suggested meeting at our apartment, but I declined. I preferred a neutral location with other people nearby. When she arrived, I immediately informed her that our marriage was over and I intended to file for an annulment. I also expressed my desire for a paternity test. She became very emotional and distraught. She immediately fell apart and knelt before me, swearing that the child was mine. She claimed to be certain based on the conception date. I insisted on the paternity test and assured her that if the child was indeed mine, I would be the best father possible. However, if it turned out otherwise, I would not have any role in the child's life. She cried, and I sat with her for over an hour while she sobbed. Eventually, I asked her to leave, and though she did so reluctantly. Come Monday, things took a strange turn. Around 10 a.m., I received a voicemail from Mary's boss. Let's call him Tony. Tony is a man in his 42nd with a wife and 3 teenage kids. In the message, Tony mentioned that Mary had informed him about our situation. He expressed a desire to encourage me not to give up on the marriage, citing his own experience with infidelity early in his marriage, which they had overcome and grown stronger from. He suggested meeting and discussing the matter, as he believed he could offer guidance to help me navigate this situation. This was unusual, very unusual. Until then, I had only encountered him a few times, and our interactions were limited to the typical pleasantries. I initially brushed it off and had no intention of returning his call. However, a few hours later, I received another message from him, this time with a tone of exasperation and nervousness. He said, "Hey, it's Tony again. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, and I don't blame you, but I'd like to clarify what happened and assure you that it meant nothing to either of us. Mary loves you, and I love my wife. Please call me back. I believe we can find a way to resolve this." What a shock. That piece of garbage was the affair partner. I was so furious and filled with rage that I had to take the rest of the day off. Later that evening, I received another message from Tony. His tone sounded desperate this time. He said, "Give me a call, man. I believe we can figure out a solution between the 3 of us to save our marriages." Of course, I didn't call him. What a fool. Later that night, I got a call from one of Mary's cousins. Let's call him Kevin. Kevin and I have become close friends over the past few years. I answered, and he asked me to explain what's happening, as everyone in the family is in turmoil over your separation from Mary. I shared all the sordid details with Kevin, and he couldn't believe it. He remarked, "Wow, the rest of the family isn't aware of this. They assume you left Mary just because she's pregnant. They think you're the villain when it's actually Mary." Throughout the evening, I continued to receive calls and texts from Mary. It was evident that she was emotionally fragile. She pleaded with me to call her back and have a conversation, emphasizing how desperately she needed me. She expressed that my support was crucial in helping her navigate the difficult situation she had created. I didn't respond because I was thoroughly disgusted with her. On Tuesday, there was no contact from Mary at all. Then, on Wednesday evening, she left me a voicemail. Her voice sounded tired and melancholic as she said, "I've lost the baby." She requested that I come over to comfort her as she felt completely devastated. Despite my strong desire to be there for her in that moment, I decided it wouldn't be wise. Additionally, my attorney had advised me against having any contact with her without a witness. I'm currently overwhelmed with guilt and questioning my choices. I still have strong feelings for Mary, and she occupies my thoughts constantly. I long for things to return to how they were before. Sometimes I even wish she had never revealed the affair, even if the baby wasn't mine. I'm certain I won't find someone like her again. What would you recommend I do? Update. Hello everyone. I'm returning here to provide you with an update on my situation. I'm still in the process of getting divorced, or more accurately, annulled. This should be finalized within the next 45 days. Since my last update, numerous events have unfolded, and I've come across some new details regarding my wife's affair. Where should I begin? You may recall Kevin from my original post, who happens to be Mary's cousin, and with whom I've developed a close friendship. His mother is Mary's maternal aunt. She receives direct updates from Mary's mom, and Kevin then shares these details with me. Naturally, they remain unaware of this. According to Kevin, Mary reported Tony, her boss, to HR, and as a result of an investigation, he was terminated from his job. Contrary to Mary's initial claim that the affair concluded before Christmas, Kevin revealed that it actually began the week before Thanksgiving and continued until Mary discovered her pregnancy, which was just a couple of weeks before she broke the news to me. Mary didn't miscarry the baby. She underwent a medical procedure because Tony pressured her after she confided in him about the affair and pregnancy, along with my intention to divorce her. According to Kevin, Tony was angered because their agreement was to keep everything secret. Mary eventually couldn't bear the guilt and told me. Mary told her mom that she believed I would forgive her for the affair and that we could have a happy family. This showed a lack of respect, according to Kevin, who also mentioned that Mary told me the same thing about the baby being Tony's based on the conception date. As I mentioned in my earlier update, Tony has lost his job, and there's talk that his wife is pursuing a divorce. Additionally, based on what Kevin shared, Mary has initiated a legal case against her company and Tony, alleging a hostile work environment. Surprisingly, she is still employed there, which I find rather perplexing. That's the latest information I have for now. Final update. 5 months later, I mentioned I'd return once the annulment was officially done, so here I am. I might appear happy, but truthfully, I'm experiencing a sense of relief rather than joy. Despite all the lies and deceit, Mary initially wouldn't agree to the annulment, which meant the legal process could have dragged on for a year or even longer. Based on information from her cousin Kevin, along with her parents' and sister's intervention, they made her realize that prolonging the proceedings would expose all her secrets in court. Eventually, Mary saw reason and consented to the annulment, which was finalized 2 weeks ago. Even though we're now divorced, Mary is still attempting to reconcile with me. She inundates me with text messages and voicemails multiple times each week, offering everything from a one-sided open marriage to sharing the settlements she received from her company and her lover. According to Kevin, she settled for roughly $100,000 from each party and ended up with around $150,000. I've consistently ignored her, and as Kevin mentioned, it's really getting under her skin. She's absolutely fixated on winning me back. She's even informed her family that reuniting with me is her ultimate objective, believing it'll happen eventually. Well, let me tell you, that's not going to occur. That sums up my story, at least for the time being. I appreciate all your advice. It genuinely confirmed I made the correct decision. Hopefully, all you newlywed guys here have taken some lessons from my ordeal and can steer clear of something like this in your own relationships. I need to share this story here because if I share it elsewhere, it could have serious consequences for my life. My boyfriend and I have been together for 3 years, and generally we've had a great relationship. However, I made a terrible mistake. There's this guy, let's call him Mike, whom I've been friends with for over 10 years. We are very close friends, and at one time during high school, we were teetering on being something more. But it never happened due to circumstances at the time. I was devastated but came to accept it, but we've remained close friends over the years and come to accept that we were meant to be nothing more. We move in the same friend circles, so we are thrown together often. Some of my previous partners have had a problem with me being close to Mike and other male friends, but generally, they've never imposed any rules, so we never had to tone our friendship down. My current boyfriend is usually jealous and protective, but since Mike also has a girlfriend, it had eased my boyfriend's worries. 2 days ago, we hung out at this trendy place outside the city and were getting drunk. As it got closer to midnight, our friends started leaving one by one. Normally, I'd have left too, as I'm an early sleeper, but this day something was in the air, and I felt it. Finally, our last friend left, and that left me and Mike with a few other random people in the bar. We decided to hang out a bit more, and were contemplating calling a taxi because we were both tipsy, but we never did call a taxi, as we both ended up in a room in the motel across from the bar. It was probably the biggest mistake of my life, but also the most sensational toe-curling lovemaking I've ever had. We had sex several times before falling asleep cuddling. The next morning I woke up to the horrible realization and started breaking down, but Mike woke up and started consoling me. Then we ended up having sex again, and by noon, we left to go to our respective apartments. Once I was on the bus, I checked my phone and saw about a dozen missed calls from my boyfriend and a few messages on WhatsApp. His last message said, "You better get back soon." I was dumbstruck because that sounded threatening, and he's never been like that before, so I hurried back home and found him waiting there with his bags packed. The second he saw me, he started lashing out at me, calling me names like hoe, slut, etc., and wouldn't even let me get a word out. I knew by that time what this was about, and, somehow, word of what I did with Mike had reached home even before I did. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't have any of it and walked out of our apartment with his stuff. On his way out, he said he hoped betting Mike was worth it because he's through with me. I went after him, literally breaking down in the parking lot, asking him to stop and listen to what I had to say. But he just drove off. The guards at the security post at the gate were watching and came to inquire after me, so I'm sure everybody in the complex has already heard of our ordeal by now. I feel intense guilt because I know my boyfriend has been faithful to me through and through. I feel absolutely terrible and don't know what to do. I don't want to involve anybody else, especially my friends. I know they'd be horrified and completely turned off by me. I do not know what to do, and I'm a total mess now. So, I know everybody asked me not to contact Mike, but I did anyway. I had to warn him that my boyfriend knows, and he might alert his girlfriend too, but it turned out she already knew. One of her CO workers had been inside the bar when Mike and I slipped off to the motel across the bar on the other side of the road. He had tipped her off, who in turn tipped my boyfriend off. So literally, by the time Mike and I hit the bed, they were aware and we had sex for hours, unaware that our respective spouses were aware of what we were doing the very second. I do not know what to feel or what to do now. My boyfriend has been completely unresponsive, and I think I'm blocked. I'm yet to tell any of my friends. I really do not want to, but I know it's just a matter of time before they come to know. Edit, yes, I've been in contact with Mike. I do not have anybody to rely on now. I need some emotional support system, and considering I'm not getting it here either, who am I even supposed to turn to except him? Edit 2, yes, Mike has been over to our place. No, I do not know what to do about our lease. It's been 4 days now since he left, and I think I've got to face the harsh truth. My boyfriend is my ex now, most likely. He's not on the lease, as this has been my apartment from the beginning, but he did pay rent. So yeah, he's not bound by the lease and can up and leave. And now I've either got to pay it all on my own, difficult given my income, or find a flatmate. My friends are still unaware. Edit 3. My friends have learned about the situation, and their opinions are mixed, which is somewhat reassuring because not all of them are completely turned off by me. Mike and his girlfriend are trying to work through things, so he's moved out of my place for the time being. I plan to post an ad soon to find a flatmate. I've been drinking excessively to numb my pain. That's the update. Feel free to criticize me if you want.
Story 3.
Late one evening, I found myself in an unexpected and rather private moment, unaware of the laughter and curious eyes around me. The cause of their amusement was not my awkward position, but rather a shocking personal revelation that I was the last to discover. They found it especially entertaining that I was completely clueless about the situation unfolding around me. How could a man be unaware that his wife was cheating on him right under his nose? Colin Wilson, who claimed to have closeness with my wife, was recounting to his friend Ben Kramer how he picked up her at a party last week. It was during this conversation that I was summoned to investigate a break-in at a local art gallery. Although I was away for only about 2 hours, I returned before the evening was over. I found my wife at a table with 3 other individuals, including Colin Wilson and his boss, along with their respective spouses. My name is Brian Sexton, and I work as an insurance investigator for a renowned insurance company that specializes in high-value property clients, likely unfamiliar to most. I entered this profession straight out of college and have remained with them for over 15 years. At 37 years old, I'm in the prime of my life. My role involves investigating incidents that may result in substantial compensation claims, primarily thefts and robberies, occasionally handling car accidents involving more than 1 or 2 of our vehicles. I'm highly skilled at what I do and have established a solid reputation in my industry. I'm often contracted out to other companies, albeit at a premium. While I may need to travel frequently, it's never for an extended period. If a lengthy investigation is necessary, I have personnel who can remain on site to complete the task. I've been married to Allison for 14 years, and we have 2 wonderful children, Regina, aged 10, and Christina, aged 8. Allison, who is a year older than me, also works at the same company as the personal secretary to Bill Quinn, the company president. Although we married before she joined the company, I encouraged her to apply for a position after she lost her previous job. Although hiring her required HR approval due to nepotism policies, they consented because of my standing within the company. Fortunately, Bill Quinn was seeking a new secretary, and Allison's extensive experience as a personal assistant at a major corporation made her an ideal candidate. After interviewing her, he immediately offered her the position as his personal secretary. The individuals I mentioned earlier, Colin Wilson and Ben Kramer, are insurance specialists who cater to large companies or individuals with significant assets. While they're not close friends, they work under Jerry Scogins, a mutual acquaintance who is also a good friend of mine. I primarily report to Bill Quinn and operate independently, though occasionally Jerry assigns me interesting tasks. I overheard a conversation a week after the party. I'd stepped into the restroom to relax for a bit when Colleen and Ben entered, seemingly disregarding the closed stall door, and began discussing the party. Colin began boasting to Ben about his recent conquest, prompting me to feel a tale of escalating discomfort in my gut, unrelated to typical cramps or sweat induced by bad fish. Ben asked Colin how he managed to seduce her, expressing surprise as he never pegged her as that type of woman. Colin explained that they did a bit of dancing and she seemed quite friendly, but when he suggested going to his office, she mentioned Brian wouldn't appreciate it. So Colin convinced her to join him for a drink at the bar. Colin went on to describe how, while Brian was occupied dancing with Judy, his secretary, he approached the bartender for a double shot and subtly swapped their drinks while Judy was engrossed in conversation. His intention was to help Judy relax so he could make advances on the dance floor. Ben questioned what Colin's plan was, considering Brian's presence, but Colin insisted he hadn't orchestrated Brian's departure, chalking it up to sheer luck. During the dance, Brian informed Judy he needed to leave briefly. Though Judy suggested he take her home first, Brian urged her to stay and have fun, promising a swift return. Although Judy wasn't thrilled, she complied, staying behind with Colin, Jerry, and his wife. Later, Colin ordered Judy another drink, secretly asking Joe to make it a double again without Judy noticing. As they continued dancing, Judy became increasingly intoxicated, clinging to Colin as he made advances. She responded with giggles and pressed against him several times. Colin thought that a few more drinks would increase his chances, so he got her another, which she quickly consumed. Unbeknownst to Judy, it was another double, and she started feeling woozy. Colin suggested they step outside for some fresh air, and Judy readily agreed. They ended up settling in the back seat of his car. She was almost unconscious, so he slid his hand under her skirt. She didn't appear to object, and even pleaded for more. He complied, and she seemed to enjoy it. He found the experience incredible. Colin expressed disbelief that Allison would engage in such behavior, considering she never seemed like someone who would cheat on her husband or be attracted to someone like him. He assured his companion that the events were genuine, mentioning a scheduled date with Allison the following Saturday when she typically went to the salon. They planned to meet and book a hotel room for the day. Colin's companion expressed envy, acknowledging Allison's attractiveness and wondering what Brian did to deserve her. He even hinted at the possibility of being introduced to Allison after Colin was finished with her. Colin responded with a non-committal perhaps and emphasized the importance of keeping their conversation confidential to avoid any complications. They both left the restroom, leaving the ME struggling to comprehend what they had heard. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. Was this really happening? I started to recall that evening. It was almost 11 when I returned to the party, finding Allison seated with Colin, Julie, and Jerry Scogins. Allison didn't seem intoxicated when I joined them, chatting with Julie about the kids. Colin exchanged a few words with me, but left after a few minutes. I noticed Allison saying something to him, but I didn't think much of it. The only odd thing about that night was when we got home, Allison wanted to make love. While not entirely unusual, she typically wasn't in the mood this late. She was particularly passionate that night. Guilt. Regret. About a week elapsed after the party, and I noticed no change in Allison or her demeanor. She never mentioned my early departure from the party, or what occurred in my absence. When I inquired, she claimed to have danced with Colin and Jerry, but mostly observed. She and Julie discussed school and the kids' play, and that was all. She expressed a preference for coming home when I left, suggesting I needed to keep a closer eye on her. "Hey, hun, any plans for this Saturday? I was thinking of playing golf, if that's all right." I watched her closely for her reaction. "This Saturday, right after lunch. I'll be at the salon. It'll take me an hour, maybe an hour and a half." "Where are you headed?" "To the golf course." "So, is she really going to the salon? How does Colleen know about this if she hasn't told him? I didn't know about this either." It all felt uncomfortably real. "I'm thinking the country club. I'll see if Ben Kramer wants to join." "I think he and Jerry are idiots, don't they?" "I'm not sure. I know Jerry is, but I don't know Ben or his wife well enough to say." "Same here. Hey, what about Colin Wilson? You spoke to him at the party, right? He might want to come along?" Allison turned and gave me an odd look, pausing before responding. "Why would you want him to come? He's, pardon my language, a idiot. I had to dance with him a few times at a party, and he really creeped me out. He's still a idiot. Now I'm wondering, is she trying to dissuade me from inviting him, or is she trying to convince me she dislikes him? Either way, it's unusual for her to speak about someone like that. Oh, I don't know much about him, but he's Ben's friend, and they seem close. Maybe it's not a good idea. I'll just call Phil and Charlie. They're always up for a round. That sounds like a better plan. Stay clear of Colin. You don't want any trouble, all right? He's off my list now. So, you're okay with golf? I'm fine with it, as long as I'll still be absent. How about dinner at the Cypress Inn restaurant afterward? I'll have a fresh haircut, and you can unwind. After golf, you can take me out and show me off. I'll drop Chrissy and Jean off at my parents'. I agreed, and we arranged to meet at home at 5:30 on Saturday to prepare. If I had been more cautious, I could have gathered enough evidence to confront her that day. It would have been fitting to lay it all out over dinner at one of the city's finest spots. The next day at work, I headed to the control room to gather some gear for tracking my wife and her lover. I decided to take one of the company's surveillance vans, leaving it in the lot until Saturday morning when I went golfing. I grabbed 2 small transmitters for her purse and car, and a GPS unit for her vehicle. It would pinpoint her exact location at any time. The van was equipped with video capabilities, but I wasn't sure how to utilize it. Since Colin mentioned a motel, filming was out of the question. Perhaps I could conceal a camera in her jacket, but only if I knew she'd wear it. I could try, but it was uncertain. With the GPS unit, I could track her movements, tapping into its signal with the van's equipment. It had local street maps, pinpointing her location within 30 meters. The audio transmitters would capture any conversations recorded within the van. All of this can be automated, so I don't even need to be present in the van. I just need to leave it about a mile away from where she was last week. My plan was to spend the rest of the week observing. I'm quite skilled at this since it's my profession. I observed Ben and Colin, but didn't notice anything unusual. Normally, I visit my wife at least once a day, but lately I've been visiting a bit more frequently. Although I hadn't seen anything suspicious yet, I decided to gather information from Ben. He explained that he was working on policies for a large factory complex, and I used to spend some time examining the site and developing contingency plans for potential disasters. This is known as risk analysis, and is part of the risk insurance process. On a particular Tuesday, I approached his desk, which was across from Colleen. He seemed deeply engrossed in his work. I greeted him and expressed my desire to review the Baxter plant plan for the day. Initially, he appeared distracted until he understood my request, after which he simply nodded and agreed, stating he was available anytime. I still needed to return to that location to take some photos. We discussed the timing, agreeing to go in about an hour. It was decided that my colleague would stop by my desk on their way. After a brief exchange, I turned the corner and noticed a smirk exchanged between Ben and Colin. They maintained their gaze on me until I was out of sight. They were intriguing individuals. I resolved that Ben would face consequences for his actions. Although he wasn't directly involved, he colluded with Colin and made disparaging remarks about my wife. He was aware of the plan and chose to witness Colin's deception, rendering him equally responsible in my perspective. An hour later, Ben arrived as arranged, and we departed in my SUV. I discreetly installed one of the small transmitters in the car console, which could record any conversation within or near the vehicle. My intention was to have a record of our private conversation. As we left the parking lot and began the 25-minute journey to Baxter, I started the conversation. I asked Ben if he had enjoyed the party from the previous week. He responded that he hadn't been present, explaining that he was away on a trip and had missed out on the festivities. I conveyed to Ben my interest in understanding what had caught his attention, particularly in light of Colin's betrayal involving my wife. I asked if that was what he had overlooked. Ben seemed taken aback by my straightforwardness and initially struggled to respond. He made a move towards the door handle, but then composed himself and met my gaze. He confessed to only knowing what Colin had relayed to him and expressed doubt about the accuracy of the information. He pondered whether Colin would invent such a narrative. I expressed skepticism about Colin fabricating such a story, but pressed Ben on how he had come to know about the situation, given his absence during the events. I mentioned hearing about his 2-hour absence, coinciding with the incidents in question. Colin had mentioned getting her intoxicated and taking her to his car, It seemed that Colin didn't have any further plans to meet up beyond what he had disclosed. Ben seemed hesitant as he recounted Colin's words, acknowledging that he was unsure about the truthfulness of the information. I sarcastically remarked on Ben's apparent loyalty and thanked him for his supposed friendship, insinuating that he was bound to inform me regardless of his intentions. Ben expressed reluctance, stating that he wouldn't wish such a situation upon me, and apologized for making me feel like a fool. He referenced Colin's claim about not being able to resist my wife. After Colleen's statement, I turned off the recorder, intending to keep our subsequent conversation off the record. I reassured Ben that as long as he followed my instructions, he would be fine, but warned him of dire consequences if he failed to comply. Ben simply nodded in agreement. Additionally, I hinted at one more matter I wished to discuss with Ben. I made it clear to Ben that Colin must remain unaware of our conversation and that he must not disclose anything to him. I emphasized the consequences of any breach of trust, including the possibility of Ben losing his job and his reputation being damaged. I reminded him that I had means of monitoring both him and Colin to detect any indiscretions. I assured Ben that I wouldn't speak to Colin or even engage with him, instructing him to continue as usual and let Colin do the talking without any interference, even if he agreed with him. Having learned the truth, I instructed Ben to heed my warnings, assuring him that everything would be fine if he followed my instructions. After that, we didn't exchange many words, spending the next 2 hours in silence. Ben fulfilled his role, and I fulfilled mine, obtaining the information I needed while ensuring Ben remained unaware for the time being. It wasn't necessary for him to know at that moment. The week felt unusually long, with me keeping a close watch on my wife, although she didn't display any unusual behavior. Wednesday evening arrived and the children went to their dance class, scheduled to conclude around 9:30. I sat in the living room watching TV when Allison joined me, settling onto my lap. She wrapped her arms around my neck, pressing her cheek against mine. "We've got about 2 hours before I need to pick up the kids. How about we make love?" Despite feeling disheartened and frustrated about the situation, I was human after all. Against my better judgment, I felt myself getting aroused. I embraced her tightly, kissing her tenderly. "Take me upstairs to our bedroom right now. I want you, and I want it now." I needed no further encouragement and followed her upstairs, admiring her figure along the way. We undressed and then engaged in passionate lovemaking. Afterwards, we lay in each other's arms for a while, content to bask in the afterglow without the need for words. It was love at its finest. For a moment, I pushed aside my doubts and fears that this might all come crashing down. I wanted to believe it was all a lie. But reality had a way of asserting itself. "That was wonderful, darling. I think we need to do this more often, don't you? We've been out of sync for a while. Let's not allow that to happen again." "Agreed. I'll make sure of it. How much time do we have? And do we have a moment for a quick shower? I have to pick up the kids after 9, but we can postpone if you like. Now, or should we wait until our date on Saturday night? I could ask the kids to stay at their mom's for the night." "How about this? I'm all yours for the evening. Anything else planned for Saturday?" "Okay, you've got golf, and I've got a hair appointment. Then, my love, we have our dinner date. And afterward, I'm all yours whenever you desire. And I expect plenty of that from you. Any better offers now?" "None at all." "Okay then, we're set." Allison quickly dressed and went to fetch the children. I lay there for a while, reflecting on what had just transpired. How could that woman be close with me like that if she slept with that awful Colin Wilson? I knew she was clever, but was she also a skilled actress? Something seemed off, and I was determined to uncover the truth on Saturday. While she was away, I checked the transmitters and confirmed they were working properly. My plan was to install them in her car on Friday night, and also on Percy. I had everything prepared except for one last meeting with Ben Kramer. I needed to know which hotel Colin had reserved. Ben would find out for me, or else I'd resort to less pleasant methods. The following morning, I phoned Ben and arranged to meet him in the third-floor cafeteria. He agreed, without question, and upon his arrival, I was already seated at a table. He joined me silently, and I wasted no time getting to the point. "Ben, old pal, I need you to find out from Colin where he intends to take Allison on Saturday. I need the motel's name and location. Just catch him alone and inquire. Tell him you suspect he's deceiving you, and that you'll trust him if he reveals the truth. I flashed a grin at Ben, who pondered how he'd manage my request. Fear of my reprisal weighed heavily on him. Eventually he relented, but inquired how I'd verify if he disclosed the meeting place. I assured him not to worry, I had my methods. As he departed, I embraced him, discreetly placing one of the transmitters beneath his jacket collar as a reminder of our deal. He was so intimidated that he remained oblivious, the transmitter almost imperceptible, secured with glue. Upon returning to my office, I activated the receiver and heard Ben's return to his desk, along with his conversation with Colin. Ben invited Colin to meet him in the copy room in 10 minutes, which Colin agreed to. Ben then questioned Colin about potential marital issues, to which Colin defensively claimed everything was fine and mentioned seeing me on set the day before, apparently doing well. Doubting Colin's words, Ben pressed him about his plans with my wife for Saturday, specifically mentioning a motel. Colin insisted on his truthfulness and offered to provide proof if necessary. Colin then disclosed that he had booked a room at the Skyview Motel on Statler Street for Saturday night, with check-in at 2 p.m. and my wife arriving by 2:15 p.m. He even suggested verifying his reservation by calling the motel. After confirming the details, Colin made a remark about my wife's marriage to me and warned Ben about meddling in their affair. Despite Ben's concern, Colin remained indifferent, suggesting that if my wife was interested, so was he. I shut off the receiver after this exchange, almost inclined to believe Colin's claims. However, I hoped he would backtrack and admit to fabricating everything, which he didn't. Instead, he confirmed the details, leaving me unsettled. Nonetheless, I now had the motel address to set up the necessary equipment in the van for surveillance. I contemplated parking the van there on Friday night, activating the gear on Saturday noon, and keeping my distance to avoid witnessing my wife's betrayal. Feeling adrift, all I could do was move forward and gather evidence to confront my wife, Colin, and Ben. First, I rang the motel, and they confirmed Colin's booking. At least that part was true. Now, I just had to bide my time until Friday evening. Then an idea struck me. What if I captured them entering the motel room on camera? I resolved to visit the motel that day and explore my options. Inside the Skyview Motel office, I awaited the clerk. He seemed shady, which suited my purposes. Honesty wasn't what I needed right now. "Hello, friend. I'm an investigator for an insurance company and I need some information. I have an ID and a warrant for you," I said, swiftly flashing my badge and presenting a convincing document that resembled a search warrant. It was a forgery, but I counted on his lack of astuteness and susceptibility to deception. The slip of cash I offered didn't hurt either. "Yes, sure. What do you need?" he replied. I asked him to confirm Colin Wilson's reservation and if he had a room number. He replied in the negative, so I suggested he assign a room on the first floor overlooking Statler Street. He hesitated until I slipped him an extra $50, finally divulging a room number suitable for my filming purposes. I informed him about the van I'd park on his property, to which he shrugged and dismissed as inconsequential. I thanked him once more for his assistance and slipped him another $50 for his discretion. A sly grin crept across his face as he pocketed the bills. After I departed, I realized I could capture the footage I desired by positioning the camera through the front window of the van, parked directly outside their room. Now I'm all set. Friday at work proved challenging for me. Unsure of what to do with myself, I made my way to Bill Quinn's office, using the excuse of discussing a recent art gallery robbery, although he didn't really need the details. My true motive was to catch a glimpse of my wife. As I traversed the hallway, her face brightened upon spotting me. She waved eagerly, gesturing for me to join her at her table, and I obliged. "I've been enjoying seeing more of you lately. Not complaining, but what's changed? Anything I should know about?" she inquired. "Nothing like that from what I know. I just enjoy being around you more," I replied. "Is Bill in?" "He is. Want me to introduce you?" she offered. "Yes, if possible. I need to discuss some matters regarding the art gallery," I explained. Entering Bill's office, I engaged in conversation with him. Despite his youthfulness for a president, I knew he had garnered a strong reputation. He had spearheaded the launch and operation of various ventures, including the site I worked on, and held a substantial stake in the company. Bill had a stunning wife named Naomi, whom I'd met on several occasions. She epitomized the quintessential trophy wife, blonde, slender, irresistibly attractive. She and Allison were of similar ages and often conversed, while Bill and I had developed a close rapport. During our discussion, I directly asked Bill his opinion on Colin Wilson. As part of my duties, I regularly provided feedback on other employees' performance at Bill's behest, though this matter concerned me personally. "Why the interest in Colin? Is there something I should be aware of?" Bill inquired. "I need to ensure any potential issues with my team members are addressed promptly," I explained. "Well, I might have some concerns about Colin. I'm not particularly fond of him, and Ben, I might have more to share with you this weekend. If things go as anticipated, I'd like to touch base with you at home on Sunday if that works for you. Otherwise, we'll reconvene on Monday," Bill disclosed. "Let's wait and see. Until then, please keep this between us," I requested. "Agreed. No problem. I trust your judgment in these matters. You've always been fair in your evaluations, and I value that. However, I'd like you to consider accepting the vice president position I proposed as you requested. I haven't broached the subject with Allison yet, but she deserves to know. If you don't inform her soon, I will. I'm just waiting for the right moment. This entails significant changes for us, so I wanted some time to deliberate. I'll give you an update next week," Bill suggested. "Sounds good. I'll definitely consider it. I've been weighing my options lately, so I'll need to make a decision soon," I assured him. With my own agenda in mind, I exited Bill's office, exchanging a few words with Allison before heading toward Ben. Pausing at his desk, I made a comment loud enough for Colleen to overhear, affirming his assessment of Baxter's performance. Then, I subtly signaled to Ben that I'd overheard his conversation with Colin, prompting a surprised reaction from him, though neither of us spoke further. Patting him on the back, I discreetly removed the small transmitter, just as before, leaving him none the wiser. I wrapped up the day without any interruptions, and waited for Allison before heading home. I intended to inform her that I needed to drop off the van somewhere and would catch a taxi to my car, causing me to be a bit delayed. She bid me goodbye with a kiss and headed home. I noticed Colleen standing by the door, observing her departure. He glanced at me briefly before returning to his seat. Afterward, I parked the van, ensured the camera was positioned correctly to capture the designated room the clerk had assigned, and secured it. I reminded the motel owner that I needed to leave it there overnight, perhaps until the following day. Slipping him an extra $20, I thanked him for his cooperation. He pocketed the money and shook my hand. With that settled, I headed home. Friday night at home brought another surprise. Allison ordered pizza for the kids and arranged for them to spend the evening at Grandma's. When I inquired why, she explained that she enjoyed our Wednesday night so much that she wanted to continue the trend tonight. Did I mind? Not at all. Friday night unfolded similarly to Wednesday with a new twist. Although I found enjoyment in the experience, a sickening feeling crept over me as I pondered where she might have learned these new techniques. However, when I later questioned her about it, she giggled and retrieved a book from her nightstand, showing me an article about lovemaking after 35. Much of what we had been doing for the past 2 nights was outlined in that article. I found pleasure in our activities that night, striving to fulfill her desires. It took up most of the night, but I didn't mind. I resolved to take Viagra in the future. As we lay beside each other, I finally mustered the courage to inquire about the source of her newfound enthusiasm. "Allison, I love what we've been doing and I want to please you, but I have to ask, where is all of this coming from? Why now? If I didn't trust you so much, I'd wonder if there might be a guilty conscience involved." "Sorry, Bree. Naomi shared something with me last week that I can't repeat. I've been reflecting on our life together, and it fills me with happiness. Sometimes, I just need to express that joy. I chose this path to show you how much you mean to me." I listened, watching her happiness with a mixture of emotions. Yet, I couldn't shake the thought. If this is true, how could she be having an affair? Should I confront her? "I'm glad you feel that way. Are you sure I make you happy enough? Are you satisfied with our closeness? Or do you feel something is missing, prompting these new endeavors? Please, be honest. I adore our closeness, and you've always fulfilled me completely. I have no desire for more, but I don't want us to fall into a routine where our passion fades into monotony. Can't you see? Don't you want me to always feel desired by you? You'll never have to worry about that. I love you and always will. I can't imagine anything jeopardizing what we have." That's reassuring because I won't allow it. We spent the remainder of the night wrapped in each other's arms, waking up the same way. Though pleasantly exhausted, I wanted to shower with Allison. I roused her and pulled her into the shower with me. Initially protesting, she eventually joined me under the water's spray, and we lovingly attended to each other's needs. Soon we both became aroused and pleasured each other. When I inquired, she mentioned she was ready for the day, but anticipated something more that night. With that, we finished our shower, got dressed early, and I drove to the motel to ensure everything was prepared. I programmed all the timers to activate at 1 p.m. and ensured the audio recording would last a minimum of 5 hours. The video footage was burned onto a DVD, a process that would take around 7 hours after compression. This would cover the entire day. I initiated the sequences and locked up the van. When these two lovers entered their sanctuary, they would become the stars of my new film, and the initial screening would make quite an impact on everyone involved. Returning home to grab my golf clubs and bid my beloved wife farewell, the day proved terrible regardless. I played golf with 2 acquaintances from the club, and if my performance was any indication, they likely believed my club membership was a waste of money. I ended up buying beer for all of us, feeling like a complete failure. Around 5, I drove to the van to ensure everything was in order. Scanning the area, I didn't spot any cars or activity, assuming everyone had already departed. Quickly calling my home phone, Allison answered, and I simply informed her I was on my way before hanging up. With the meeting time with Allison drawing near, I drove home without reviewing the collected information. I was eager to have it before dinner, but then I reconsidered our planned evening. Why not savor what she offered one last time? Despite the betrayal, I still enjoyed making love to her. However, I found myself choking up again. Why was she doing this to me? I loved her deeply, and the thought of living without her seemed unbearable. I knew that if the evidence on the surveillance tapes confirmed my suspicions, divorce would be inevitable. Though I loved her, her behavior was unacceptable. But what about the children? She was a devoted mother and deserved custody. If she had indeed cheated, there must have been a reason unknown to me. She was fundamentally good, but had made a grave mistake. I could come to terms with that. She could care for the children, and I would provide child support. These thoughts consumed me as I drove home to reunite with my wife. Uncertain if I could endure the evening, I knew I had to try. Legal action couldn't be taken until I had concrete evidence. Yet, a small voice in the back of my mind persisted, casting doubt on all the information gathered thus far. I brushed it aside. Facts were facts, and soon I would have all the evidence I needed. At home, Allison had already showered and dressed, mentioning she would add the finishing touches when it was time to leave. Meanwhile, I hurried to get ready, ensuring we left on time to make our reservation. My wife was radiant, always drawing attention as we entered the room. She was accustomed to the admiring glances of men, which she effortlessly brushed off. Yet, I couldn't help but notice, and it always filled me with pride. Tonight served as a stark reminder of what could have transpired. Despite this, she remained intelligent and engaging, making for an excellent dinner companion. We conversed on various topics typical of spouses enjoying a night out, and she seemed to indulge in more wine than usual, given my role as the designated driver. It felt as though she was particularly flirtatious with me, her husband. As we concluded our dessert of chocolate mousse, preceded by sorbet, we exchanged smiles. Both of us were eager to retire to the bedroom upon returning home that evening. I signaled to the waiter for the bill as Allison excused herself to the restroom. Exiting hand in hand, we made our way to the car. As I navigated onto the main street towards our house, Allison leaned against my shoulder, intertwining our fingers. She gently moved my hand from the steering wheel to my lap, and without much prompting, I enveloped her in a hug reminiscent of our youthful love. She sighed contentedly, and we drove home in this love-making embrace. Once home, Allison busied herself with household tasks, until finally turning to me. "Shouldn't we head upstairs and pick up where we left off this morning? You owe me something, since you only gave me a down payment earlier, remember?" "I do. Lead the way and I'll follow." We ascended to the bedroom swiftly, where Allison stood before the bed. I stripped down to my boxers and socks while she removed her top and bra, leaving only a strand of pearls around her neck. As she reached to remove them, I halted her hand. "Leave them be. You look incredibly hot standing there with nothing but those pearls. You're stunningly beautiful." This is a sight only I will see. I am completely yours, and I want you to do as you please with me. I want this night to mark the beginning of a lifetime together. Are you certain? Is this what you desire? I wouldn't want to do anything to cause you pain or embarrassment. You should know that I trust you entirely and offer myself completely to you. I love you with all my heart." In that moment, I believed her, knowing that regardless of what I discovered the next day, I would never give up on her. I decided to postpone any further thoughts until tomorrow. Tonight, I would love this woman with all my heart. That night, we explored new realms of closeness, trying positions I never imagined and experiencing things I never thought possible. At times, she would laugh and cite a page number when I inquired about her fantasy, yet it was a magical night, a night where I learned to love conversation, giving and receiving in equal measure. What a night it was! We fell asleep in each other's arms, waking late Sunday morning. Reluctant to rise, she agreed to one more encore of our favorite moments from the night before. Afterwards, she had to pick up the girls for Sunday, and I mentioned the need to swiftly check on the van. She suggested she might stay at her mom's for a while before returning. This afforded me the opportunity to retrieve the tapes from the van and inspect their contents. I still had to check what I left in her purse and car, but that could wait. She departed, and I drove to the van, retrieving all the films and prints without issue before returning the van to the production facility. I called a taxi to pick me up and transport me back to my car, then headed home. The first step I took was to examine the GPS printout. She had confirmed her car's location on Statler Street, where the motel stood, and at that moment, my heart nearly ceased beating. Though I hoped against hope, it seemed my fears had materialized. Despite almost deciding not to proceed further, I felt compelled to view the video firsthand. I switched on the TV and DVD player, inserting the DVD, preparing myself for heartbreak. The image was crystal clear, the room perfectly centered on the screen. I fast-forwarded until I spotted a car approaching, then slowed to normal speed. Colin Wilson emerged from the car, opened the room's door, and disappeared inside. Rewinding, another car appeared, and I witnessed a woman approaching, knocking on the door, and being greeted by Colin's smile as she entered the room. When she turned, revealing her face, my heart raced, and my pulse skyrocketed. Pausing the video, I watched it from start to finish before removing it. "Well, I'll be damned," I muttered to myself. I needed to contact Bill Quinn immediately. There was one address I had to verify, so I retrieved my wife's address book from my desk drawer. As anticipated, the address I sought was there, confirming my suspicions. A smile crept onto my face. With all the necessary information in hand, I dialed Bill's home number. Urging him to meet me immediately, he initially insisted I come to his house, but I persuaded him to meet me alone elsewhere. Eventually, we agreed to rendezvous at the TGIF restaurant near the office. An hour later, we met there. Allison and the girls had plans for dinner at her mom's, affording me the time I needed. At TGIF, I briefed Bill before revealing the DVD. I brought along a portable player with a 9-inch screen and headphones for privacy. As he listened, his anger simmered beneath the surface. Initially skeptical, he vehemently denied the possibility of Allison's involvement. However, as I played the recording of Ben's encounter with Colin and laid out the entire narrative, implicating both Ben and Colin, Bill's complexion turned crimson with rage. Despite his personal regard for Allison, he gradually accepted the truth. I advised him to watch the DVD before passing further judgment. As Bill viewed the footage, his countenance fell, evident pain etched across his face. Sensing his need for privacy, I looked away, allowing him to process. When he finished, he met my gaze, and I waited for his response. Once composed, I made my sole request. I want them both terminated for breaching the moral clause in their contracts, effective by Monday afternoon. With the evidence I've provided, you have the authority to act as you see fit. I won't mention this again. Bill's surprise shifted into a smile. It was reassuring to witness. I aim to involve him in this matter only as much as necessary. You have my word that this will be handled first thing Monday, and I'll personally escort them off the premises. They're dead to me. There may be further action I'll take, but it's best you don't know the details. Understood. Agreed. Following that, I handed him a bag containing all the surveillance data except for one small cassette, which I retained for my own purposes. It was necessary for my plans regarding my wife. Bill and I continued our discussion for another hour or so, making additional decisions to address later in the week. We parted ways with a handshake, and before I left, Bill addressed me once more. "Brian, you're a good and honorable person. I appreciate what you've done and respect your actions in handling this matter. Things could have escalated if you were less level-headed. You have my gratitude and respect." I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in some time as I headed home to my family, who remained unaware of the impending changes. That evening at home went smoothly and my spirits were high. Allison was curious about what had transpired, but I told her she'd learn more at work the next day. Exhausted from the previous nights, we retired early for a peaceful night's sleep. Allison wanted to be embraced, and I gladly obliged. We fell asleep in each other's arms. Just like the previous night, Monday at work was bustling with activity. Allison called me at 9:30 to update me on the situation. I pretended to be clueless and asked for details. She informed me that Bill had summoned Ben Kramer and Colin Wilson to his office immediately. They were currently present and tensions were high. I professed confusion and requested further updates. 20 minutes later, Allison called again, reporting that Bill had instructed her to contact security urgently. She discreetly handled the call at her desk before informing me that Bill had directed security to escort Ben and Colin back to their workstations. She hastily ended the call, promising to update me later. An hour passed, with no word until Allison finally phoned to reveal that both Ben and Colin had been terminated, with Bill requesting her to draft disciplinary letters citing a breach of the morals clause. She was exhilarated, deeming it the most unusual event during her tenure as Bill's secretary. She insisted we grab lunch together to discuss it, and I agreed. Over lunch, Allison recounted the events of the morning in detail. She described the escorting of Ben and Colin out of the building and the warning to never return. She mentioned Bill's evident agitation, even recounting a moment when he momentarily snapped at her before apologizing. Eventually, she turned to me, seeking insight. "How would I know about this? Bill instructed me to ask you." When I pressed him, he simply said, "Ask Brian, he's aware of everything and opened my eyes to a lot. So, spill it. Before I divulge anything, I want you to listen to this tape first." I handed her a cassette of Ben and Colin's conversation about the motel. She listened intently, her expression turning pale as she reached the end. Removing her headphones indignantly, she exclaimed, "This is absurd. It's a lie. I never went to any motel with him, and I never would. You can't trust this recording. Did you show this to Bill? Does he believe this nonsense too? No, he doesn't believe Colin, and neither do I. I have something to explain, and I expect you to listen attentively without interruption." When I expressed skepticism about the tape, Allison eased slightly, though she remained angry and somewhat apprehensive. She nodded for me to continue. "I overheard Ben and Colin talking about a week ago," I began. "Colin boasted to Ben about an encounter between you and him at a party. He claimed he got you intoxicated and then took you to his car, where you engaged in lovemaking activity in the back seat. He provided explicit details of the incident to Ben, who seemed convinced by his account. In fact, Ben was so impressed that he wanted to be involved in the next rendezvous. Confused, I sought confirmation of the truth. Allison attempted to interject, but I persisted, needing to uncover the reality swiftly before it escalated. I instructed Ben to confront Colin, who admitted to booking a motel room on Statler Street for Saturday afternoon, coinciding with your supposed hair appointment, I continued. This raised alarms, as I couldn't understand how he knew about your hair appointment unless you had informed him. Remember, I mentioned our plans for Saturday evening to you? Despite this, he never showed up. Determined to verify your involvement, I utilized a company's surveillance van to monitor your car and record anyone entering the motel room. After obtaining the room number from the receptionist, I arranged to review the footage on Sunday. Subsequently, I contacted Bill and provided him with all the evidence, resulting in Ben and Colin's termination at my behest. As I recounted the events to Allison, she remained bewildered and adamantly denied being at the motel with Colin. "But I wasn't with him. I was at the salon as I told you," she protested. "My salon is indeed on Statler Street, but I had no knowledge of any motel rendezvous. You don't believe me. I know who he was with because she confessed it to me herself." Cutting her off, I pressed on, needing to reassure her of my trust. "I don't believe that, but I trust you implicitly," I affirmed. "Let me explain. I received footage of Colin's encounter that day, and indeed a woman visited him as he claimed. This woman was none other than Bill's wife, Naomi." My suspicions were initially aroused after a conversation with Jerry Scogans a few days prior. When Colin alleged he took you to his car that night, I inquired with Jerry if you were intoxicated. He chuckled, revealing that you and his wife had only consumed soft drinks that evening and were inseparable. He even mentioned how you asked her to remain by your side to deter Colin from asking her to dance, indicating your lack of interest in him. When I asked if Colin ever suggested stepping outside for some air, Jerry simply laughed, implying he had nothing to say. So did you truly doubt me? Did you orchestrate this surveillance to spy on me? I'm troubled by this lack of trust, especially after our evenings together on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Of course, I believed in you, but Colin's fabrication left me with doubts. I suspected he was diverting Ben's attention away from his true companion. Uncertain of her identity, I had to uncover the truth, though I wish it hadn't implicated Bill's wife. He was utterly devastated. We conversed further before reluctantly returning from our lunch break. Allison accepted my explanation regarding my inquiry into Colin's companion, and I left her to her thoughts. Though I harbored some doubts, I felt no regret in uncovering the truth. Our relationship was now stable, and I was determined to maintain that. Work had settled by then, but Allison informed me that Bill requested to speak with her. Later that evening, I mentioned that I was unaware of the details, and she seemed to believe me. I received no further updates until we sat down for dinner at home. Amidst the girls' usual flurry of activities, we found a moment of peace, during which Allison shared Bill's conversation with her. He spoke about the importance of having a husband like you, emphasizing trust, respect, and love, and the devastation of losing it all, she recounted. Then he confided in me about Naomi's actions and sought my counsel. And what advice did you offer him? Were you able to assist? I refrained from dictating his actions. Instead, I encouraged him to reflect on his love for Naomi and consider forgiveness, if feasible. I urged him to engage in a candid conversation with her, but also cautioned against prolonging the decision if reconciliation seemed improbable. He seemed receptive to my words, so perhaps I made a difference. I'm certain you did. Did he mention anything about me? No, nothing further. Is there something else on your mind? Well, yes, Bill extended an offer for me to assume the role of Vice President of Investigations for the corporation. It entails overseeing all investigators worldwide and offers the flexibility to choose our place of residence, potentially in California or Florida. Although I would still report to Bill, this would come with substantial financial rewards and benefits, including shares. Allison's excitement was palpable as she leaped into my arms, overwhelmed with joy. When did this happen? Is it in recognition of your actions today? Is it a sort of reward? She exclaimed. Now, who's doubting whom? Bill proposed this to me 6 months ago, but I wasn't ready to consider it until now. The prospect of losing everything I've built made the decision more tangible. Last week I feared I might have lost you, and it prompted me to reevaluate, I explained. Brian, you could never lose me like that. I won't stray ever. It's out of the question, and you mustn't think otherwise. Do you understand? Never again, she affirmed, holding me tightly.
Story 4.
The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the bay windows of the two-story suburban home where Chris Matthews had built his life for the past 15 years. The house stood as a testament to his success. Pristine landscaping, elegant architecture, and a sense of permanence that now felt like a cruel joke. Inside, the air grew thick with tension as his wife Angela prepared for a weekend getaway. Chris stood in the doorway of their master bedroom, watching Angela pack her designer clothes into a sleek burgundy overnight bag. Each item she selected was a reminder of their shared life. The silk blouse he'd given her for their anniversary, the dress she'd worn to his firm's Christmas party. Now these tokens of their marriage would adorn her for another man's pleasure. You don't have to pretend anymore, Angela, Chris said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. He noticed how she flinched at his words, her hands pausing briefly over a folded sweater. We both know exactly what this weekend is about. Angela straightened, tucking a strand of her perfectly styled dark hair behind her ear. She'd spent an hour getting ready, applying makeup, and choosing her outfit with the kind of care she hadn't shown for their own dates in years. Michael and I need this time together, she said, her tone carrying that breathless excitement that had become all too familiar since she'd met him 6 months ago. I'm tired of sneaking around, Chris. At least I'm being honest now. A bitter laugh escaped Chris's throat. Honest? Is that what you call throwing away 15 years of marriage for a man you barely know? He stepped into the room, noting how she subtly moved away, maintaining distance between them. Tell me, does Michael know about the 3 other affairs you've had? Or is he special? Color drained from Angela's face. That's not fair. Those were mistakes, and you know it. Michael is different. He understands me in ways you never have. Of course he does, Chris replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He understands you so well that he's convinced you to spend 2 days with him while your husband sits at home. Tell me, Angela, does his understanding extend to his other women too? Angela's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? There aren't any other women. Michael loves me. The doorbell's chime cut through their tension. Angela's face lit up, and she quickly zipped her bag. That's him. I need to go. She moved toward the door, but Chris stepped in her path. Listen carefully, he said, his voice low and controlled. This moment, right here, this is the point of no return. Walk out that door with him, and everything changes. No more reconciliation, no more chances. Think very carefully about what you're about to lose. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Angela's face. The doorbell rang again, and whatever doubt she might have felt vanished. I've made my choice, Chris. I'm sorry if you can't accept that. She brushed past him, her perfume another gift from him lingering in the air. Chris remained in the bedroom, listening to her footsteps on the stairs. The sound of the front door opening, Michael's deep voice greeting her with practiced charm. Chris moved to the window, watching as Michael emerged from his BMW to help Angela with her bag. Michael was everything Chris wasn't: tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from a lifetime of getting away with things. He wore an expensive suit that Chris suspected wasn't paid for with honest money, his silver watch catching the sunlight as he took Angela's bag. Their embrace in the driveway sent a surge of rage through Chris's body. Michael's hands lingered possessively on Angela's waist, and she melted into him with an eagerness that twisted the knife deeper into Chris's gut. But he didn't look away. He forced himself to watch, to let the anger and betrayal fuel what would come next. Chris moved to the front door, stepping onto the porch just as Michael was helping Angela into the passenger seat. Their eyes met across the manicured lawn, and Michael had the audacity to smile, that smug, self-assured smile of a man who thought he'd won. Taking good care of your wife, Chris? Michael called out, his voice carrying that subtle mockery that only Chris seemed to detect. Don't worry, she's in good hands for the weekend. The double meaning wasn't lost on Chris. He maintained his composure, years of courtroom experience serving him well as he crafted his response. You know, Michael, I've been thinking about doors lately. He gestured to his front door, noting how Michael's smile faltered slightly at his calm demeanor. How walking through the wrong one can change everything. You'll regret ever walking through that door, my friend. That's a promise. Michael's confidence wavered for a moment, something dark and uncertain passing behind his eyes. But he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Always so dramatic, Chris. Try to enjoy your weekend alone. I know we will. He slid into the driver's seat, but Chris caught the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the steering wheel from the passenger seat. Angela wouldn't meet Chris's gaze. She stared straight ahead, her posture rigid, as Michael started the engine. The BMW's purr filled the quiet street as they pulled away from the curb, leaving Chris standing on his porch, watching his wife disappear with her lover. Only when the car had turned the corner did Chris allow his mask to slip. His fist connected with the wall beside the door, the pain barely registering through his fury. The sound echoed through the empty house, a house that had once been filled with love and laughter. Now tainted by betrayal, Chris stepped back inside, closing the door with deliberate softness. The click of the latch felt like sealing a tomb, marking the death of his marriage and the birth of something darker. He walked to his study, each step measured and purposeful. The pleasant family photos lining the hallway now seemed like mockery. Angela's smile, and each one a reminder of her duplicity. The study had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could think clearly and strategize. Now it would become his war room. Chris settled into his leather chair, the familiar comfort doing little to ease the tension in his shoulders. His laptop hummed to life, the screen's glow illuminating his face in the dimming afternoon light. "Time to see what skeletons you're hiding, Michael," he muttered, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The rage that had threatened to overwhelm him earlier crystallized into something colder, more focused. He opened a new document and began typing objective: complete destruction of Michael Peterson's life and reputation method, systematic investigation and exposure of criminal activities timeline. Immediate commencement. Chris paused, then added another section: secondary objective: ensure Angela faces consequences for her betrayal method, document infidelity, protect assets, prepare for aggressive divorce timeline. Concurrent with primary objective, the familiar rhythm of investigative work helped steady his nerves. Chris had built his career on finding the truth, on exposing lies and deception. Now he would use those same skills to dismantle the lives of those who had betrayed him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Angela had chosen a criminal to replace him, and now his expertise in exposing criminals would be their undoing. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Arrived safely." "Don't wait up." Chris didn't respond. Instead, he opened his banking app and began the process of securing his assets. By the time Angela returned on Sunday, the financial noose would already be tightening. Let her enjoy her romantic weekend with Michael. It would make the fall that much harder when it came outside. The sun had set completely, leaving the study in darkness except for the laptop's glow. Chris didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness suited his mood as he began his deep dive into Michael Peterson's past. Every lie, every scheme, every victim, he would find them all. The game had begun, and Chris intended to play for keeps. The gentle hum of Chris's laptop filled the study as midnight approached. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, testament to hours spent diving into Michael Peterson's past. His initial searches had revealed an intriguing pattern: a trail of dissolved companies and disappeared investments spanning multiple states. Chris rubbed his tired eyes, leaning back in his chair as he reviewed his findings. Michael's LinkedIn profile painted the picture of a successful investment consultant, but the gaps between positions told a different story. Companies appeared and vanished like mirages, leaving nothing but broken promises and empty bank accounts. "Show me who you really are," Chris muttered, typing another search string. His legal training had taught him to look for patterns, to find connections others might miss. He created a timeline spreadsheet, mapping Michael's movements across the country. Boston, Chicago, Seattle, each city marked another iteration of the same scheme. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. A small business journal from Portland had published an article 3 years ago about the sudden closure of Apex Investments. The piece was brief, but it mentioned investor complaints and allegations of fraud. More importantly, it listed names former clients who claimed Michael had disappeared with their money. That Chris's fingers flew across the keyboard as he dug deeper. Social media accounts, business registrations, court records, everything went into his growing database. By dawn, he had uncovered a pattern of harassment complaints, all settled out of court. Michael was careful, never letting any single incident grow large enough to attract serious attention. Sleep tugged at Chris's consciousness, but he forced himself to continue. He drafted careful emails to Michael's former business partners, presenting himself as another victim seeking information. The responses started arriving within hours. David Morrison's reply caught his attention. "If you've been burned by Peterson, I want to talk. Not over email. Meet me at Carson's Diner, noon today. I'll be the guy in the blue blazer." Chris arrived at the diner 15 minutes early, choosing a booth with a clear view of both exits. The place smelled of coffee and grilled onions, nearly empty between the breakfast and lunch rushes. David Morrison arrived precisely at noon, his blue blazer wrinkled and his eyes carrying the weight of lost dreams. "You look too put together to be one of his victims," David said as he slid into the booth. He ordered whiskey neat from the tired-looking waitress, ignoring her raised eyebrow at the early hour. "So, what's your stake in this?" Chris studied the man across from him. David Morrison had once been successful. His watch was expensive but worn, his clothes quality but dated. The kind of man who'd lost everything and never quite recovered. "He's sleeping with my wife," Chris replied, watching David's reaction carefully. "I want to know exactly who she's chosen to betray me for. David's bitter laugh echoed through the nearly empty diner. Your wife? Jesus. He took a long swallow of his whiskey. Well, I can tell you exactly who she's chosen. A parasite. A man who destroys lives for sport and profit. Over the next 2 hours, David painted a detailed picture of Michael's operation. The initial charm offensive, the carefully crafted appearance of success, the gradual buildup of trust. Then came the investment opportunity, always exclusive, always time-sensitive. He showed me bank statements, profit projections, everything, David said, his voice hollow. $2 million. My entire retirement fund, plus what I'd set aside for my kids' college. When the company folded, he vanished. Police said they couldn't prove criminal intent. How many others? Chris asked, recording every detail in his phone. In my group, 5 major investors. But I've found others since then. He changes his name slightly each time. Michael Peterson, Mike Peters, M.J. Peterson. Just enough variation to create doubt. David pulled out his own phone, scrolling through contacts. I still have numbers for most of them. We try to build a case, but he's careful about staying under federal jurisdiction thresholds, Chris finished. Keeps each scheme small enough to avoid serious attention. David's eyes narrowed. You're not just some angry husband, are you? Corporate fraud lawyer, Chris replied. I've spent my career taking down people like Michael. I know how they think, how they operate. He leaned forward. And I know how to build a case that will stick. Hope flickered across David's weathered face. We tried that. Police wouldn't touch it. Police have jurisdiction limitations. But I have other resources. Chris pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. I'm going to need statements from everyone. Detailed accounts, documentation, anything you still have. Can you help coordinate that? David pocketed the card, his hand steadier than it had been all morning. Give me a few days. I'll get you everything we have. Back home, Chris called Detective James Martinez. They'd worked together on several corporate fraud cases, building a reputation for bringing down white-collar criminals who thought themselves untouchable. James answered on the second ring. Chris? Been a while. Heard about Angela. Word travels fast. Chris cut in. I need a favor, James. Off-the-record background check on Michael Peterson. I'll text you the details. A pause on the line. This about Angela's new friend? Let's just say I'm doing my due diligence. James sighed. Give me 24 hours. But Chris? Don't do anything stupid. Stupid would be letting him get away with it again. Chris replied, ending the call. The rest of the afternoon blurred into a marathon of research and phone calls. Chris contacted former colleagues, private investigators, anyone who might have useful information. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, revealing the true scope of Michael's operations that by evening. Chris had compiled a preliminary dossier, multiple harassment complaints settled out of court pattern of fraudulent investment schemes across 3 states' estimated total fraud amount. $4.70 million, at least 15 confirmed victims' history of romantic entanglements with married women, possible connections to organized crime. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Having dinner at La Maison. Remember our first date there? The message sent a fresh wave of anger through Chris. La Maison was their special place where he'd proposed, where they'd celebrated anniversaries. Now Michael was tainting those memories too. Chris didn't reply. Instead, he opened his email and composed a message to Thomas Sullivan, the city's most feared divorce attorney. Sullivan's reputation for destroying unfaithful spouses in court preceded him. The consultation was set for Monday morning. As night fell, Chris received another text from James. Found something interesting. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., usual place. Bring coffee. Chris allowed himself a grim smile. The pieces were falling into place faster than he'd expected. He opened a new document titled Operation Downfall and began organizing his findings. Michael thought he was untouchable, protected by careful planning and jurisdictional limitations. But he'd never faced an opponent like Chris, someone who understood the system from the inside, who knew how to build a case that would destroy not just Michael's freedom, but his entire carefully constructed facade. The study had become a command center, walls covered with printouts and timelines. Chris worked through the night, fueled by coffee and revenge. He created multiple backups of his evidence, storing them in secure cloud accounts. If Michael had friends in law enforcement, Chris wouldn't risk losing what he'd gathered around 3 in the morning. His phone lit up with another text from Angela, a photo of her and Michael at their hotel's rooftop bar, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Life is perfect." Chris saved the photo to his evidence folder. Her words would come back to haunt her soon enough. The small diner where Chris met James the next morning smelled of bacon and stale coffee. James was already in their usual booth, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been up most of the night. "You look like hell," Chris said, sliding into the booth and passing James a large coffee. "Spent all night pulling files." James glanced around the nearly empty diner before continuing. "Your boy Peterson is a piece of work. Multiple allegations of harassment, fraud, and stalking across 3 states. Changes his name slightly each time, but the pattern's the same." He pushed the envelope across the table. Chris opened it carefully, examining the police reports and mugshots inside. The photos showed Michael's progression, each image slightly different, but with the same predatory smile. "Why isn't he in jail?" Chris asked, though he already suspected the answer. Smart lawyer, smarter paper trail. Structures everything just under federal jurisdiction thresholds. Local departments don't have the resources for complex financial crimes. James leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But here's where it gets interesting. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has an open RICO investigation. They're building a case against him and several associates." Chris felt a surge of anticipation. "Can you connect me with the agent in charge?" "Not directly, but I can make sure any evidence you gather reaches the right people." James tapped the envelope. "They're particularly interested in his current activities." Chris pulled out his phone, showing James the photos he'd taken of Michael's recent business documents. "Like this new investment firm he's setting up? Same scheme, different letterhead." They spent the next hour discussing strategy. James couldn't officially assist, but he could ensure Chris's evidence reached the federal investigators. He also promised to keep Chris informed of any developments in the FBI case. "One more thing," James said as they prepared to leave. "Be careful, Chris. Peterson's got a history of retaliating against people who cross him. Nothing that ever stuck in court, but let him try," Chris replied, his voice cold. "I'm counting on it." Back in his study, Chris began implementing the next phase of his plan. He started with the finances, methodically separating his assets from Angela's. Their prenuptial agreement gave him significant leverage, but he needed to ensure everything was properly documented, that he created a detailed spreadsheet, joint accounts to close, primary checking vacation fund investment, portfolio new accounts to open, personal checking business account secure investment holdings. Chris worked through each item systematically, transferring funds and updating account permissions. He left just enough in the joint accounts to avoid immediate suspicion. Angela had never paid attention to their finances, a fact that would soon work against her. Next came the evidence compilation. Chris created a secure digital vault, organizing everything he'd gathered: photos of Angela and Michael together, text messages, and emails, financial records, showing Michael's fraudulent activity statements from previous victims, police reports, and court documents. Timeline of their affair. Each piece of evidence was carefully labeled and cross-referenced. Chris had learned from years of prosecution that cases were won through meticulous preparation. His phone buzzed. Another text from Angela. "Miss me? Don't worry, I'm in good hands." Chris added the message to his evidence file. Every communication now served a purpose, building the case that would destroy them both. 18 noon, he received an email from Thomas Sullivan's office confirming Monday's appointment. Chris began preparing his presentation, organizing the evidence that would convince Sullivan to take his case. The attorney's reputation for ruthlessness in divorce proceedings was exactly what Chris needed. As he worked, Chris's thoughts drifted to the moment he'd first suspected Angela's infidelity. The late nights at work, the new clothes, the sudden interest in her appearance. He'd watched her pull away, making excuses to avoid their usual activities. Now those memories fueled his determination. The afternoon brought a call from David Morrison. "I've got statements from 3 other victims," he said without preamble. "They're willing to testify if it comes to that. And I found something else. Peterson's got a new investment scheme starting up. Same pattern as before. Send me everything, Chris replied. And David? Thank you. Just make him pay, David said before hanging up. Chris spent the next few hours creating a secure communication network for Michael's victims. They needed to coordinate their evidence without alerting Michael to their activities. He set up encrypted email accounts and a secure cloud storage system for sharing documents. As evening approached, Chris began the final phase of his weekend preparation. He drafted a series of emails to local business journalists, laying out the basics of Michael's fraud scheme without revealing his sources. The stories would start appearing just as the FBI investigation reached its critical phase. That he also prepared anonymous tips for Michael's current investors, warning them about his history of fraud. The seeds of doubt would be planted, ready to bloom into full panic when the evidence became public. That Chris's phone lit up with another photo from Angela. She and Michael at some expensive restaurant, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Her caption read, "Best weekend ever. Never been happier." The photo joined the others in his evidence file. Let them celebrate. Let them think they were untouchable. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall. As Sunday evening approached, Chris methodically cleared away all evidence of his weekend activities. The study returned to its normal appearance, giving no hint of the destruction being planned within its walls. When Angela returned, she would find him calm and composed, showing no sign that her world was about to implode. He had one final task before her return. Chris composed a message to Michael's most recent victims, the ones currently being drawn into his latest investment scheme. He created an anonymous email account and sent them detailed information about Michael's current location and activities. Then he sent similar information to local business journalists who might be interested in exposing a fraud story. The pieces were in place. Chris poured himself a scotch and settled into his favorite chair to wait. Soon, Angela would return home, probably glowing from her romantic weekend. She would have no idea that her lover was about to be exposed as a criminal, or that her own comfortable life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. Chris smiled as he sipped his drink. The weekend had been productive, more productive than Angela could possibly imagine. He had gathered the ammunition and positioned his weapons. Now it was just a matter of timing the strikes for maximum impact. The game was no longer about saving his marriage or even simple revenge. It was about justice, cold, calculated, and complete. Michael and Angela had chosen their paths, made their decisions. Now they would face the consequences outside. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood red. Chris watched the colors fade to darkness, feeling a sense of calm purpose. The betrayal that had started this war would soon be repaid tenfold. Let them enjoy their final moments of happiness. The storm was coming, and he would be the one to unleash it. Monday morning arrived with the promise of destruction. Chris sat in Thomas Sullivan's office, watching the divorce attorney review the evidence he'd gathered over the weekend. Sullivan's reputation for ruthlessness was reflected in his office decor. Stark, modern furniture and walls decorated with news articles about his biggest victories. "This is thorough," Sullivan said, looking up from the folder. His steel-gray eyes held the calculating look of a predator assessing its prey. "Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've brought me a complete case." "I'm not most clients," Chris replied, adjusting his tie. "I want more than just a divorce. I want her to lose everything." Sullivan leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Tell me about the prenup." "Ironclad. The infidelity clause explicitly states she forfeits all marital assets and any claim to my business interests." Chris pulled out another document. "She signed it willingly. We have video of the signing." "Smart man." Sullivan nodded approvingly. "But you're not just after the money, are you?" "This level of documentation suggests a bigger plan." Chris met the attorney's gaze. "Angela chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a criminal. I intend to make sure she shares in his downfall." Speaking of the boyfriend, Sullivan picked up another file. "This evidence of his criminal activities, how solid is it?" "Rock solid. I've got statements from his previous victims, documentation of his fraud schemes, and a direct line to the FBI agents building a RICO case against him." Sullivan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Impressive. But be careful. If we move too aggressively, they might suspect you're coordinating with law enforcement." "That's why I need you," Chris said. I want everything done by the book. No legal loopholes they can exploit. The attorney studied him for a moment. Most men in your position act from emotion. You're different. Cold. Calculated. He smiled thinly. I like it. Here's what we're going to do. They spent the next hour outlining strategy. Sullivan's plan complemented Chris's perfectly. A two-pronged attack that would leave Angela with nothing while avoiding any appearance of coordination with the FBI investigation. That as Chris left Sullivan's office, his phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. Meet me at O'Malley's. Got something big. O'Malley's was a cop bar near the courthouse. The kind of place where conversations disappeared into the dark with paneling and cigarette smoke. James was at their usual corner table. 2 beers already waiting. You look pleased with yourself, James said as Chris sat down. Good meeting with my divorce attorney. What's the news? James glanced around before leaning forward. Remember those harassment complaints against Peterson? One of the victims reached out to me. Lisa Turner. Says he didn't just harass her. He threatened her family when she tried to expose his scheme. We can use that, Chris said, his mind already racing with possibilities. Is she willing to talk? Better. She kept recordings. Peterson was stupid enough to make threats over the phone. James took a long drink. But here's the real kicker. She says he's got connections to the Martinez cartel. Money laundering. Chris's eyes narrowed. That would explain how he's been moving the money from his schemes. Can we prove it? FBI's already on it. But they're building slowly, carefully. You know how cartel cases have to be handled? How long until they move? Month, maybe 2. They want everything perfect before they strike. Chris drummed his fingers on the table. That works. Gives me time to set up the rest of my plan. He pulled out his phone, showing James a series of documents. Look what I found this morning. James whistled softly. Is this legitimate? These transfer records, completely real. Michael's been sloppy lately, getting overconfident. He's running the same scheme again, but bigger this time. More investors, more money, and more evidence for us, James finished. But Chris, be careful. If he's really connected to the cartel, let him come after me, Chris said, his voice hard. I'm counting on it. Back at his office, Chris received an unexpected visitor. David Morrison stood in his reception area, looking more put together than he had at their diner meeting. His eyes held a newfound determination. Sorry to drop in, David said as Chris led him to his office. But I had to show you this in person. He pulled out a thick envelope. Remember how I said I'd contact other victims? Well, they've been busy. This is everything they've gathered on Peterson's current operation. Chris spread the contents across his desk. Bank statements, investment proposals, emails, a paper trail of deception that made his previous schemes look amateur. He's getting bolder, David said, pointing to a particular document. Look at these numbers. He's promising 20% returns, minimum. And people are buying it. Of course they are, Chris replied. He's learned how to sell the dream. Make them think they're part of something exclusive. He picked up one of the investment proposals. But this time it's going to be his downfall. What do you mean? Chris opened his laptop, pulling up a series of emails. I've been in contact with his current marks, dropping hints, raising questions. When this house of cards falls, they'll be the ones pushing for prosecution. David studied him carefully. This isn't just about the money for you, is it? No. Chris's voice was cold. It's about justice. For everyone he's hurt. As David left, Chris received another text from Angela. Missing our bed. Michael's hotel is nice, but it's not home. He added the message to his evidence file without responding. Let her think his silence meant defeat. Soon enough, she'd learned the truth. The rest of the day was spent coordinating with Sullivan's team, preparing the legal documents that would strip Angela of everything when the time came. Each paper was another nail in the coffin of her comfortable life. Evening found Chris back in his study, reviewing the day's progress. His phone rang an unlisted number. Mr. Matthews? A woman's voice, hesitant but determined. This is Lisa Turner. Detective Martinez gave me your number. He said you're building a case against Michael Peterson. Chris sat up straighter. I am. I understand you have some recordings? Yes. Her voice hardened. And I want him to pay for what he did to my family. When can we meet? The recording played through Chris's laptop speakers, filling his study with Michael Peterson's voice. Even through the slight distortion, The menace in his tone was unmistakable. "Listen carefully, Lisa," Michael's voice growled. "Your daughter still walks to school alone, doesn't she? Keep pushing this, and something might happen to her. Accidents occur every day." Lisa Turner sat across from Chris, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. 2 years had passed since Michael had threatened her family, but the fear in her eyes was still fresh. "I have 3 more recordings like this," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious tension. "Each one worse than the last. When I tried to go to the police, he had someone following my daughter, taking pictures, sending them to my phone." Chris stopped the recording. "And you're sure you want to come forward now?" "I've spent 2 years looking over my shoulder," Lisa replied, straightening her spine. "Living in fear. No more. I want him destroyed. He will be." Chris opened his laptop, showing her the evidence he'd gathered. "But I need you to understand something. When this breaks, he'll know you helped me. Are you prepared for that?" Lisa's eyes hardened. "I've already moved my family. New house, new schools. We're ready." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "And I'm not the only one. Remember Karen Mitchell? Another victim?" She recorded everything too. Videos of their meetings, photos of the documents he used to convince her to invest. She's been waiting for someone to build a real case against him. Chris leaned forward. "Put me in touch with her. The more evidence we have, the harder he'll fall." Their meeting was interrupted by a call from James Martinez. Chris excused himself to take it in the hallway. "We've got movement," James said without preamble. "FBI's accelerating their timeline. Peterson's latest scheme caught their attention. They're worried about the cartel connection." "How soon?" 2 weeks, maybe less. They're setting up surveillance now." James paused. "There's something else?" "Peterson's been making calls to some dangerous people. He's nervous." "Good," Chris replied. "Nervous people make mistakes?" Back in his study, Chris found Lisa examining the timeline he'd created on his wall. "He's doing it again, isn't he?" she asked, pointing to the recent dates. "Same scheme, different victims. Bigger stakes this time." Chris showed her the latest investment documents. "He's promising returns that would make Bernie Madoff blush. And I've got proof he's using cartel money to create the illusion of profits." Lisa's face paled. "The cartel? You're sure?" "Absolutely. Which is why timing is crucial." Chris sat down, fixing her with a serious look. "I need your recordings, but I need you to wait before filing any official complaints. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. "Just tell me when." After Lisa left, Chris received a text from Angela. "We need to talk. Meeting you at La Maison for lunch tomorrow." He forwarded the message to Sullivan, who responded immediately. "Perfect timing. We're the wire we discussed. Get her talking about the affair." La Maison was quieter at lunch than during its dinner service. Chris arrived early, choosing a table that would allow him to record the conversation clearly. Angela walked in 10 minutes late, her confident stride faltering slightly when she saw him already seated. "You look tired," she said, sliding into her chair. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her own fatigue. "Busy week," Chris replied neutrally. "You wanted to talk?" Angela fidgeted with her water glass. "I think we should discuss living arrangements." "And other arrangements." "You mean divorce?" "Don't act surprised, Chris. We both know this isn't working anymore." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "We can do this amicably. Split everything fairly. No need for ugliness." Chris allowed himself a small smile. Interesting choice of words. Fairly. Tell me, what's fair about throwing away 15 years of marriage for a con man? Angela's face flushed. "Don't start with that again. Michael is a successful businessman. Just because you're jealous successful?" Chris interrupted. "Is that what he told you? Did he mention Apex Investments? Or Lisa Turner? Or the cartel money he's been laundering? What are you talking about?" Angela's voice wavered slightly. "What cartel? You really don't know who you're sleeping with, do you?" Chris pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of Michael meeting with a known cartel associate. "Your boyfriend's been busy. But don't worry, you'll learn all about it soon enough." "You're lying," Angela snapped, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Michael explained about his past business issues. It was just a misunderstanding that cost people their life savings. Chris leaned back, watching her face carefully. But hey, I'm sure he's changed. I'm sure you're different from all the other married women he's manipulated. Special even? Angela stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to listen to this. Michael loves me. We're building a future together. A future built on fraud and blood money. How romantic. Chris's voice remained calm. Remember what I said about choices, Angela? About points of no return? You've made yours. Now live with it. She stormed out of the restaurant, but Chris noticed her hands shaking as she gathered her purse. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now to water it back at his office. Chris received an urgent call from David Morrison. Peterson's getting desperate, David said, his words tumbling out. He just called an emergency meeting with his investors, promising even higher returns if they bring in new money now. Classic signs of a Ponzi scheme about to collapse, Chris noted. Did you record the call? Better. I got a video. He was sweating, Chris. Something's got him spooked. Send me everything. And David? Tell the others to be ready. It's starting. The video arrived an hour later. Chris watched Michael's performance with professional interest, noting the subtle signs of stress beneath his confident facade. The slight tremor in his hands, the too wide smile, the frequent glances at his own phone buzzed with a text from James. FBI surveillance caught something. Peterson met with cartel enforcers this morning. It got heated. Chris smiled. The pressure was building exactly as planned. Soon, Michael's carefully constructed world would begin to crack, but a knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa Turner stood there, accompanied by a tall woman Chris recognized from his research. Karen Mitchell, the woman introduced herself. Lisa said, "You're the one who's finally going to take him down." Chris gestured for them to sit. "Tell me everything." Karen's story poured out another tale of manipulation and threats, but with a crucial difference. She'd been smarter than Michael expected, gathering evidence from the beginning. "I knew something was wrong when he started pushing for larger investments," she explained, pulling out a USB drive. "So I recorded everything. Our meetings, his promises, the threats when I wanted to pull out. And this," she handed over a stack of documents, "is his real investment strategy. The one he doesn't show his clients." Chris examined the papers carefully. They revealed the full scope of Michael's operation. How he used cartel money to create the illusion of profits, paying old investors with new money while skimming millions for himself. "This is exactly what we needed," Chris said, already scanning the documents into his system. "But I have to ask, why come forward now?" Karen's eyes hardened. "Because he's doing it again. I've been watching him. Those new investors he's bringing in, they're going to lose everything. I can't let that happen." "They won't," Chris assured her. "Not this time." After they left, Chris received another text from Angela. "Michael's acting strange. Keeps checking his phone, making private calls." "What did you do?" He didn't respond. Let her worry. Let her wonder. The cracks in her perfect new life were beginning to show. Chris spent the evening organizing the new evidence, creating multiple backups. Tomorrow, he would share everything with James and the FBI team. But tonight, he allowed himself to enjoy the growing tension in his targets' lives. His phone buzzed one final time, a message from Sullivan. "Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bringing in a forensic accountant. Time to turn up the heat." The forensic accountant's presentation filled the conference room screen with damning evidence. Red arrows traced the flow of money through Michael's various shell companies, each transaction revealing another layer of fraud. "It's a classic Ponzi structure," Marcus Reynolds explained, his laser pointer circling key figures. "But with a twist. He's using cartel money to create the illusion of legitimate business success. When investors ask questions, he shows them real transactions with real profits." Thomas Sullivan nodded appreciatively. "Beautiful work. How long before he runs out of money?" "Days," Marcus replied. "Maybe a week." His latest investor meeting was a desperate play for cash. Classic signs of imminent collapse. Chris studied the financial diagrams. And Angela's involvement? Minimal, technically. Marcus pulled up another screen. She's listed as a consultant on his newest venture, but there's no evidence she knows about the fraud. However, he highlighted several transactions. He's been moving money into accounts under her name, setting her up to take the fall if things go wrong. "Using my wife as a shield," Chris said, his voice cold. Added to the evidence file. Sullivan gathered his papers. Speaking of evidence, the judge granted our emergency motion. Angela's access to all marital assets is now frozen. She just doesn't know it yet. Chris's phone buzzed a text from James Martinez. FBI moving timeline up. Peterson's getting sloppy. Meet me, AS. The diner was crowded when Chris arrived, forcing James to take a booth near the kitchen. The detective looked worried. Peterson's coming apart, James said over the clatter of dishes. Made 3 calls to known cartel contacts this morning. They're not happy with him. What's got them spooked? Money's missing. A lot of it. James slid a photo across the table. This was taken yesterday. Notice who he's meeting with. Chris examined the image. Michael sat at an outdoor cafe with a man Chris recognized from FBI surveillance photos, a high-ranking cartel financial officer. Meeting didn't go well, James continued. Our lip readers caught phrases like, "Where's our money?" and "No more time." How long before they move on him? That's the problem. FBI wants to arrest him before the cartel decides to handle things their way. We're talking days, not weeks. Chris's phone lit up with Angela's name. I need to take this. Chris. Angela's voice trembled slightly. Something's wrong with our accounts. My cards are being declined. Are they? Chris kept his tone neutral. Have you asked Michael for help? I'm sure your successful businessman boyfriend can cover your expenses. Stop it. This isn't funny. I need access to our money. Our money? Chris allowed himself a small laugh. You mean my money? The money I earned while you were busy destroying our marriage? Check your email. Angela. Sullivan's office sent some interesting documents this morning. A pause, then the sound of typing. He heard her sharp intake of breath as she read the court order. You can't do this, she whispered. You can't just cut me off. Actually, I can. Prenup, remember? The one that specifically mentions infidelity. He waited a beat. How's Michael handling his business troubles? He seems stressed lately. What are you talking about? Ask him about his meeting yesterday. The one with his cartel friends. I'm sure he'll be totally honest with you. Chris ended the call before she could respond back at his office. Chris received an urgent message from David Morrison. Emergency investor meeting called for tomorrow morning. Peterson's promising unprecedented opportunities. Want me to record it? Every second, Chris replied. He's desperate for cash. This should be interesting. The next development came from Karen Mitchell. She burst into Chris's office without an appointment, her face flushed with excitement. You won't believe what I just found, she said, pulling out her phone. Remember how Peterson always conducts business at that coffee shop on 5th? Well, I was there this morning. She played a video Michael at his usual table, arguing quietly but intensely with a well-dressed man. Even without audio, the tension was clear. That's Miguel Ramirez, Chris said, recognizing the cartel's chief money launderer. When was this? An hour ago. But that's not the best part. Karen swiped to another video. Watch what happened after. The new clip showed Michael leaving the coffee shop, visibly shaken. He made it 3 steps before throwing up in a nearby trash can. He's terrified, Karen said with satisfaction. Whatever they said to him, it worked. Chris forwarded the videos to James, then called Lisa Turner. Time to file those complaints. All of you. Tomorrow morning. First thing. What about the cartel? Lisa asked. Won't they? Trust me. By the time they decide to move, Peterson will be in custody. But we need to force the FBI's hand. That means maximum pressure. Right now, the pieces were falling into place faster than Chris had anticipated. He spent the afternoon coordinating with Sullivan's team, ensuring every legal document was perfectly prepared. Evening brought another frantic call from Angela. Michael's acting strange, she said without preamble. He keeps making private calls, checking over his shoulder. And now I can't access any of our accounts. Our accounts? Chris corrected. You mean your boyfriend's accounts? The ones funded with cartel money. Stop saying that. Angela's voice rose. Michael's not involved with cartels. He's just having some temporary business issues. Temporary? Chris cut in. Like the temporary issues that cost his previous victims their life savings? Or the temporary issues that led to death threats against their families? Silence on the line. Then, quietly. What death threats? Ask him about Lisa Turner's daughter. Ask him about the photos he sent. The people he hired to follow a 12-year-old girl. Chris's voice hardened. Ask him about Karen Mitchell or David Morrison or any of the others whose lives he destroyed. I'm sure he'll have perfectly reasonable explanations. You're lying, Angela whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Check your email. I've just sent you some interesting recordings. Listen to them, Angela. Listen to the man you chose over our marriage threaten an innocent child. He hung up, knowing the recordings would do their work. Lisa's tapes would shatter whatever illusions Angela still held about Michael's character. Late that night, Chris received an urgent text from James. It's happening. Cartel enforcers spotted heading to Peterson's office. FBI moving in tomorrow morning. Chris smiled. Perfect timing. The complaint filings from Michael's victims would hit the courthouse just as the FBI moved in. The press would have a field day. Prominent businessman arrested. Multiple fraud allegations. Cartel connections exposed. And Angela? She'd watch it all implode. Knowing she'd tied her future to a sinking ship, his phone buzzed one final time. A message from Angela. Just listen to the recordings. Oh, God. What have I done? Chris didn't reply. Her realization came far too late to save her. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. In his study, Chris raised a glass to the evidence wall that had helped him orchestrate Michael's destruction. The game of cat and mouse was nearly over. But the real satisfaction would come from watching Angela's perfect new life shatter, along with her lover's criminal empire. Let them both lie awake tonight, haunted by their choices. Tomorrow would bring consequences they never imagined. Dawn broke over the city with the promise of destruction. Chris sat in his parked car across from Michael's office building, watching FBI agents take their positions. James Martinez's text had come an hour earlier. Operation starting at 7 a.m. sharp. You want to see this? Chris's phone buzzed again, Angela calling for the third time since midnight. He let it ring. After listening to Lisa Turner's recordings, she'd left a string of increasingly desperate messages. Chris, please. We need to talk. Those things Michael said in the recordings, I didn't know. Something's wrong. He's not answering my calls. Let her panic, Chris thought. The real show was about to begin. Detective Martinez approached Chris's car, coffee cups in hand. Quite the turnout, he said, sliding into the passenger seat. FBI, DEA, even Homeland Security. Your boy Peterson really pulled in the alphabet soup. How's he looking? Nervous. Security cameras caught him arriving at 4 a.m. He's been shredding documents ever since. James handed Chris one of the coffees. But here's the interesting part. Cartel enforcers have been circling the block for an hour. They want their money. Chris checked his watch. They won't get the chance. How many victims filed complaints this morning? 17 so far. More coming in? Peterson's secretary quit an hour ago. Apparently, he threw a phone at her head when she brought him the court notices. Movement at the building's entrance caught their attention. Michael burst through the doors, his typically immaculate appearance in disarray. His expensive suit was wrinkled, tie askew, face covered in sweat despite the cool morning air. Right on schedule, Chris murmured, checking the time. 6:55 a.m. Watch this. Michael had made it halfway to his car when the first FBI vehicle pulled up, blocking his path. More cars appeared, surrounding him. Agents emerged with weapons drawn. Michael Peterson, a senior agent's voice boomed through a megaphone. FBI, get on the ground. Michael froze, then bolted directly toward the alley where Chris knew the cartel enforcers were waiting. Before he could reach it, two agents tackled him. The sound of his face hitting the pavement was audible even from Chris's position. Your wife's watching, James said quietly, nodding toward a car parked down the street. Angela sat behind the wheel, her face a mask of shock as she watched Michael being handcuffed. Good. Chris started his engine. Time for phase 2. The divorce papers should be hitting her inbox right about. His phone buzzed with a notification from Sullivan's office. Documents delivered to A. Matthews. The next hour unfolded exactly as Chris had planned. Local news vans arrived, broadcasting Michael's arrest live. Social media exploded with photos of the prominent investment consultant being led away in handcuffs. His face bloody from the pavement, Chris drove to Sullivan's office, where the attorney waited with a satisfied smile. Quite a morning, Sullivan said, gesturing to the news playing on his office TV. Your timing was impeccable. Angela saw everything. Front row seat. And Sullivan held up his phone. She just opened the divorce filing. Full electronic service confirmation. Chris settled into a chair. How long before the office door burst open? Angela stood there, face flushed, clutching her phone. Her designer outfit couldn't hide her disheveled state. You orchestrated all of this, she accused, waving the phone. The arrest, the complaints, everything. Please come in, Sullivan said smoothly. We've been expecting you. Angela's eyes darted between them. I want to talk to my husband. Alone. Ex-husband, Chris corrected. And anything you have to say, you can say in front of my attorney. Fine. Angela dropped into a chair, her composure cracking. I saw the news. The recordings. All of it. Michael's not who I thought. Save it, Chris interrupted. The time for explanations was months ago. Now. He gestured to the divorce papers on Sullivan's desk. Now it's time for consequences. You can't just throw away 15 years. That's exactly what you did, Chris cut in, his voice sharp. When you chose him, when you flaunted your affair, when you ignored every warning I gave you. I made a mistake. Angela's voice cracked. I see that now. We can fix this. Fix what? Chris leaned forward. The lives Michael destroyed? The families he threatened? Or maybe you want to fix his cartel connections? The money laundering? Angela flinched. I didn't know about any of that. Of course you did. Chris pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Angela's voice discussing Michael's investment opportunity with a potential client. You helped him recruit victims, vouched for his character. Their losses are on your hands too. I thought it was legitimate. Tears streaked her makeup. He told you what you wanted to hear. Just like he told Lisa Turner before threatening her daughter. Just like he told every other victim. Chris's voice remained cold. But here's what I'm telling you. You get nothing. The prenup is ironclad. Your access to our accounts is permanently frozen. That nice life you thought you'd have with Michael? It's over. Sullivan cleared his throat. Mrs. Matthews, I should advise you that any attempts to contest this divorce will result in your own complicity in Mr. Peterson's schemes being reported to the FBI. Angela's face crumpled. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? That's not my problem anymore. Chris stood. You chose your path, Angela. Now you get to walk it. Alone. He left her crying in Sullivan's office, her sobs following him down the hallway. Outside, reporters had gathered, drawn by Michael's arrest and the connection to a prominent attorney. Chris's phone buzzed with a text from James. Peterson's singing like a canary. Naming names, locations, everything. Cartel's not gonna like that. Perfect, Chris thought. Michael's desperation would guarantee a lengthy sentence. No judge would grant bail to a man with cartel connections and a history of witness intimidation. By noon, the story had gone national. Chris watched from his office as cable news dissected Michael's arrest, his fraud schemes, and his cartel ties. Financial reporters detailed the millions stolen from investors. Local news focused on the human angle, interviewing victims like Lisa Turner and Karen Mitchell. A call came in from David Morrison. Did you see? They're unfreezing our accounts. The FBI found most of the money. Good. Chris allowed himself a small smile. How does revenge feel, David? Better than I imagined. But listen, Angela's been calling everyone, begging for help, trying to explain her side. Let her beg. No one's going to help the woman who helped Michael target his victims. Chris ended the call and stood at his office window, watching the city below. Phase 1 of his plan, Michael's destruction, had succeeded perfectly. Now for Phase 2, ensuring Angela's complete social and financial ruin. His phone buzzed with another message from her. Please. I have nowhere to go. Chris added the text to his evidence file without responding. Let her feel the same desperation Michael's victims had felt. Let her understand exactly what she'd thrown away. The game wasn't over yet. But Chris had just won the first round decisively. The press conference outside the federal courthouse drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Hamilton stood at the podium, outlining the charges against Michael Peterson. The defendant faces 37 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed audience. The investigation has uncovered a sophisticated criminal enterprise that preyed on innocent investors while facilitating cartel money laundering operations. Chris watched from the back, noting the reporters scrambling to capture every detail. James Martinez stood beside him, providing running commentary. Peterson's lawyer tried to get bail. James muttered. Judge shot it down in record time. Called him a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. How's he holding up in custody? Not well. Already asked for protective custody. Seems he's worried about his cartel friends sending someone to silence him. A reporter's question caught their attention. Is it true that the defendant's girlfriend, Angela Matthews, was involved in recruiting investors? Hamilton's response was measured. We're investigating all parties who assisted Mr. Peterson in targeting victims. No one involved in this scheme will escape scrutiny. Chris's phone buzzed with a text from Sullivan. Angela's sister just called. Wants to negotiate. Said Angela's desperate. No negotiations, Chris replied. Let her feel what desperation really means. The media coverage had been relentless since Michael's arrest. Local news stations ran special reports on his victims, including emotional interviews with Lisa Turner and Karen Mitchell. Business journalists dissected his fraud schemes, exposing every detail of his criminal empire. After the press conference, Chris met Lisa and Karen at a nearby coffee shop. Both women looked lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. They found most of our money, Karen said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The FBI's asset recovery team. They said we could have it back within months. Lisa nodded. The nightmares are finally stopping. My daughter can walk to school again without looking over her shoulder. What about Angela? Karen asked. Have you heard from her? She's been trying to contact everyone, Chris replied. Looking for sympathy, support, anything she can get. She came to my house yesterday, Lisa said, her expression hardening. Crying about how she didn't know, how she was a victim too. I told her exactly what I thought about that. What did you say? Chris asked. I reminded her about last month's investment seminar. How she stood there next to Michael, vouching for his character, encouraging people to invest their savings. Lisa's voice turned cold. She knew enough. She chose not to see the rest. Chris's phone lit up with another call from Angela. This time he answered. The bank is foreclosing on my apartment, she said without preamble. My credit cards are maxed out. I can't even buy groceries. Sounds familiar, Chris replied. Just like Karen Mitchell after Michael cleaned out her accounts. Or David Morrison when he lost his retirement savings. I'm your wife. Ex-wife, Chris corrected. And you're experiencing exactly what Michael's victims felt. The fear, the helplessness, the shame. I've lost everything, Angela whispered. No, you threw it away. There's a difference. Chris kept his voice steady. Remember when I warned you about choosing your path? This is where it led. He ended the call as Sullivan approached his table, carrying a thick folder. Latest update from the FBI, Sullivan said, sliding into an empty chair. They're adding conspiracy charges against some of Peterson's associates. Angela's name came up in the investigation. How serious? Serious enough. They have recordings of her pitching the investment scheme to potential victims. Even if she claims ignorance, the evidence suggests she knew something was wrong and chose to ignore it. Chris nodded. Make sure that information reaches her sister, the one who wanted to negotiate. Let her understand exactly what Angela's facing. The afternoon brought another development. David Morrison called with news from the investment community. Angela tried to get a job at Reynolds Financial, he said. They showed her the door as soon as they realized who she was. Word spreading fast, no one wants to risk hiring Peterson's girlfriend. Good, Chris replied. Let her experience what his other victims went through. The closed doors, the rejected applications, the whispers and stares. Evening found Chris in his study, reviewing news coverage of the case. His phone buzzed with a text from James. Peterson made another deal offer. Wants to turn state's evidence against the cartel. They'll never let him live long enough to testify, Chris texted back. He knows. That's why he's begging for witness protection. Full relocation, new identity, the works. Chris smiled. Michael's carefully constructed world hadn't just collapsed, it had imploded spectacularly, taking his freedom and his future with it. That a knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Through the security camera, he saw Angela standing on his porch, looking broken and desperate. "Please," she called through the door. "I know you're home. We need to talk." Chris activated the intercom. Everything that needed saying was said in Sullivan's office. "I'm sleeping in my car." Her voice cracked. "My own sister won't take me in. No one will help me. Just like no one would help Lisa Turner when Michael's threats forced her to move across the country. Or Karen Mitchell when she lost her home." Chris's voice remained cold. "Actions have consequences, Angela. You're finally facing yours." "What do you want from me?" she sobbed. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I don't want anything from you," Chris replied. "Not anymore. Go back to your car, Angela. It's all you have left." He watched through the camera as she slumped against the door, crying. After 10 minutes, she finally left, walking unsteadily to the old Honda. She'd been reduced to driving a far cry from Michael's luxury BMW. That Chris's phone lit up with a final text from James. "Peterson's first court appearance tomorrow. Media's calling it the fraud case of the year. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more charges, more evidence of Michael's crimes. And Angela would watch it all unfold. Knowing she'd tied her fate to a sinking ship, the destruction Chris had planned was complete. Michael faced decades in prison if the cartel didn't reach him first. Angela had lost everything: her home, her reputation, her future. Their perfect life together had shattered into irreparable pieces, and this was just the beginning point. 1 month after Michael's arrest, Chris sat in the federal courthouse, watching his former wife's world crumble completely. Angela stood before Judge Harrison, her designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack business wear, her usual confidence shattered. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Harrison's voice filled the courtroom, "the evidence suggests you were more than just an unwitting participant in Mr. Peterson's schemes. You actively recruited investors, vouched for his character, and helped facilitate meetings that led to substantial financial losses for multiple victims." Angela's court-appointed defender tried to intervene. "Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of the criminal nature." "Save it," the judge cut in. "The recordings paint a different picture. Mrs. Matthews, this court views your actions as a betrayal not just of your marriage, but of the entire community's trust." Chris watched Angela's shoulders slump as the judge continued. "While you're not facing criminal charges at this time, this court is ordering you to pay restitution to the victims you personally recruited. The amount will be determined at a separate hearing." Outside the courtroom, Lisa Turner approached Chris, satisfaction evident in her stride. "Did you see her face?" Lisa asked, when the judge mentioned restitution. "Finally, she understands what it feels like to lose everything." "How's your daughter doing?" Chris asked. That Lisa's expression softened. "Better. We moved back home last week. She's sleeping through the night again. No more nightmares about strange men following her." They were interrupted by Angela's voice, trembling with desperation. "Chris, please. Just 5 minutes." He turned to face her. The past month had taken its toll: dark circles under her eyes, unwashed hair, the haunted look of someone watching their life disintegrate. "Why?" he asked coldly. "Want to explain how you didn't know? How you were a victim too?" "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My apartment, my friends, my reputation. Just like I lost my wife," Chris cut in. "Like Lisa's daughter lost her sense of safety? Like Karen Mitchell lost her home?" Lisa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You sat in my living room, Angela. Told me how trustworthy Michael was, how his investment opportunity was too good to pass up. Remember that?" Angela flinched. "I believed in him. I thought." "You thought you'd found something better," Chris interrupted. "A more exciting life with a successful man. How's that working out for you?" Before Angela could respond, James Martinez approached with news about Michael. "Peterson's deal fell apart," he said. "Cartel wasn't happy about him trying to flip. He's in protective custody now, but—" James shrugged meaningfully. Chris nodded. "How long's his sentence looking?" 30 years minimum. "If he lives that long?" James glanced at Angela. "FBI's still investigating some of his associates. Never know what might turn up." Angela paled at the implied threat, hurrying away down the courthouse hallway. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floors, each click a reminder of how far she'd fallen. Later that afternoon, Chris met with Sullivan to finalize the last details of his divorce. The house sold, Sullivan reported, well above asking price. Of course, under the prenup terms, Angela won't see a penny. What's she doing for money? Sullivan shuffled some papers. Working as a waitress at that diner on 4th Street. Ironic, it's where Peterson used to meet his victims. He looked up at Chris. Her sister finally took her in, but only after making her sign a contract to pay rent. The community's turned against her completely? Absolutely. My contacts say she can't even get a job interview once people realize who she is. Peterson's victims made sure everyone knows her role in his schemes. Chris's phone buzzed with a text from Karen Mitchell. Just saw Angela at the grocery store. Using food stamps. Karma's real. The next day brought Michael's sentencing hearing. Chris attended, wanting to witness the final destruction of the man who'd tried to steal his life. Michael sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suits replaced by prison orange, his confident smirk erased by fear. He'd aged years in the months since his arrest. Your Honor, Michael's lawyer began. My client recognizes the severity of his actions. Objection. The prosecutor stood. The defendant has shown no remorse. In fact, he attempted to shift blame to his girlfriend while trying to negotiate with the cartel from inside jail. The judge's voice was steel. Mr. Peterson, you've orchestrated one of the most cynical fraud schemes this court has ever seen. You didn't just steal money, you destroyed lives, threatened families, and collaborated with violent criminals. Michael tried to speak. Your Honor, if I could, you're facing 37 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. This court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Chris watched satisfaction spread across the victims' faces as Michael was led away in chains. The man's desperate glance toward the gallery found no sympathy, only the cold stares of those whose lives he destroyed outside. Reporters surrounded Chris for comments. How does it feel, seeing justice served? Chris chose his words carefully. This wasn't just about Michael Peterson's crimes. It was about everyone who enabled him, who looked the other way, who helped him target victims while pretending not to see the truth. The message wasn't subtle. Within hours, local news stations were running stories about Angela's role in the scheme, complete with recordings of her pitching investments to victims. That evening, Chris received an unexpected visit from David Morrison. We're organizing a support group, David said, settling into Chris's study. For Peterson's victims. Thought you might want to be involved. I appreciate it, but I'm moving forward. Chris gestured to the packed boxes around his study. Sold the house. Taking a position with a firm in Denver. Running away. Starting fresh. This house, this city, too many memories. Chris poured them both a scotch. Besides, my work here is done. Angela came by my office yesterday, David said. Looking for paralegal work. Any job, she said. Couldn't even look me in the eye. She'll learn to live with shame, Chris replied. Just like she forced others to live with loss. The next morning brought a final piece of news. James called early. Thought you want to know, he said. Peterson tried to hang himself in his cell last night. Failed, but he's on suicide watch now. The mighty fall hard, Chris observed. That's not all. Remember those cartel connections? Word is they've still got a price on his head. He'll spend his whole sentence looking over his shoulder. Chris ended the call and stood at his study window, watching the moving truck arrive. The last boxes would leave today, erasing all trace of his life with Angela from this house. His phone buzzed one final time, Angela's number. Her voicemail was brief, broken. I found your divorce papers today. The final ones. I understand now. What I threw away. What I lost. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Chris deleted the message without responding. Let her live with regret. Let her wake up every day knowing she destroyed her own life by choosing a criminal over a good M. And as he walked through the empty house one last time, Chris felt no sadness, no lingering attachment. Angela and Michael had gambled everything on their affair, certain they would win. Instead, they'd lost it all: money, freedom, reputation, future outside. The morning sun painted the sky in shades of promise. Chris had a new life waiting in Denver, a fresh start far from the ashes of his marriage. He'd achieved more than revenge, he'd delivered justice, not just for himself, but for every life Michael and Angela had helped destroy. Let them live with their choices. He had a future to build,